Mom, you eat here for free.
I'll make one phone call. They're routine papers. Just sign them. I never sign what I don't understand. Daniel has no authority
Without Margaret's
written approval.
the trust.
Stays exactly as Arthur intended.
I still remembered the exact way Daniel said it. Not angry, not embarrassed, not even apologetic. He simply looked across the dinner table, with Lawrence sitting beside him, and said, "Mom, you eat here for free." The room seemed to shrink around those 6 words. 6 months earlier, I had trusted him with paperwork connected to my late husband's estate. I had sold my house. I had moved into his home after surgery. I had believed every promise he made. Yet somehow I had become the burden. The strange part was that I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I smiled, folded my napkin, walked into the hallway, and made a phone call. "Charles," I said quietly when he answered. "Freeze everything tonight." Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 6 months earlier, Margaret Hale still believed her son would never make her feel like a burden. At 69 years old, Margaret thought she understood what vulnerability felt like. She had buried her husband 3 years earlier after 41 years of marriage. She had survived the grief that followed. She had survived the long, empty evenings in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. And most recently, she had survived knee replacement surgery that left her temporarily dependent on other people. What she did not yet understand was how quickly dependence could become control. Her small house outside Cleveland had become difficult to manage after the surgery. The stairs were painful. The yard demanded attention she could no longer give. Even carrying groceries from the driveway felt exhausting. Daniel had sounded concerned when he called. "Mom, why don't you stay with us for a while?" he asked. At the time, the suggestion felt reasonable. He was 42 now, successful enough, married to Lauren for nearly 10 years, living in a large suburban home outside Columbus. "Just until you're fully recovered," he said. Margaret remembered feeling grateful. A few weeks later, she packed her belongings and moved into their guest room. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. At first, everything seemed fine. Lauren greeted her warmly. The guest room was clean and comfortable. Daniel carried her luggage upstairs himself. For the first month, Margaret convinced herself she had made the right decision. Then small things began changing. Not enough to start an argument, just enough to create discomfort. Lauren started managing every detail of Margaret's daily life. At breakfast, she would decide what Margaret should eat. At dinner, she reminded her which medications to take. When Margaret offered to do laundry, Lauren insisted she rest. When Margaret suggested driving herself to a physical therapy appointment, Lauren immediately objected. "You're still recovering," she said. The words sounded caring. But after hearing them enough times, Margaret noticed something strange. Every decision seemed to require Lauren's approval. One afternoon, Margaret attempted to organize some paperwork she had brought from Cleveland. Lauren walked into the room carrying folded towels. "Oh," she said. Margaret looked up. "What?" Lauren smiled politely. "You really don't need to worry about all that." Margaret glanced at the papers. "It's just financial records." Lauren placed the towels down. "At your age, complicated documents only stress you out." The comment was delivered casually, almost kindly, yet it lingered long after Lauren left the room. Margaret had spent 35 years working as a school administrator. She had balanced budgets, managed payroll systems, handled contracts, but suddenly she was being treated like someone incapable of reading her own paperwork. The pattern continued. Lauren started collecting the mail every day before Margaret could reach the mailbox. When Margaret asked if anything had arrived for her, Lauren always gave the same answer: nothing important. The phrase repeated often enough that it began bothering her. Nothing important. One evening, Margaret mentioned it to Daniel while they sat in the living room. "Have you noticed I never seem to get any mail anymore?" Daniel barely looked away from his laptop. "Mostly junk," he said. "Still, if something matters, we'll let you know." "We," the word caught her attention. Not you, not me, we, as though she were no longer responsible for her own affairs. Margaret smiled politely and changed the subject. But that night she wrote the date in a small notebook she kept beside her bed. Not because she suspected anything, at least that was what she told herself. She simply wanted to remember. The notebook became a habit. Dates, comments, conversations, nothing dramatic, just observations. Her husband Arthur had always believed records mattered. "You never regret writing something down," he used to say. By late spring, Margaret noticed another change. Daniel seemed increasingly distracted. Every conversation eventually returned to money, mortgage payments, insurance, property taxes, interest rates, home repairs. The topic surfaced almost every evening. Lauren usually led those discussions. "Everything costs more now," she said one night. Daniel nodded heavily. "No kidding," Lauren sighed. "Sometimes I feel like we're carrying the whole world." Margaret sat quietly at the table. Something about Lauren's tone felt deliberate, not directed at her exactly, but not accidental either. The next weekend, Margaret overheard part of a conversation she suspected was never meant for her ears. She had been walking toward the kitchen when she heard Lauren speaking in the dining room. "We can't keep doing this forever." Daniel sounded exhausted. "I know. There has to be another solution." Margaret paused. Neither of them knew she was nearby. Then Lauren lowered her voice. "Eventually, she's going to have to help." Margaret stepped away before hearing more. Help with what? The question stayed with her for days. A week later, Daniel brought several documents home from work. Margaret noticed him sorting through them at the kitchen island late at night. When she approached, he quickly stacked the papers together. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Nothing exciting." He smiled. "Just financial stuff." The answer felt strangely rehearsed. Margaret nodded. Then she noticed something else. One page had her last name printed across the top. Hale. Daniel saw where she was looking and immediately flipped the stack over. The movement lasted less than a second. But she noticed, and once noticed, it became difficult to forget. The following morning, Margaret opened her notebook again. For the first time, she wrote something more than simple observations. Daniel hiding paperwork. May 17. Her handwriting looked unusually firm. She stared at the words for several seconds, then closed the notebook. Days passed. The discomfort remained. One afternoon, while Lauren was shopping and Daniel was at work, Margaret decided to retrieve a box she had stored in the garage. Inside were old records from Cleveland, tax returns, insurance files, property documents, bank statements, things she had not reviewed since moving. As she sorted through them, she found a business card tucked between two folders. Charles Whitaker, attorney at law. Margaret smiled faintly. Arthur's attorney, their attorney. She had not spoken to Charles since Arthur's funeral. For a moment she considered calling, then she shook her head. There was no reason to overreact, not yet. Still, instead of putting the card away, she slipped it into her purse, just in case. That evening, Lauren hosted dinner for 2 adult neighbors. Margaret joined them. The conversation remained pleasant until someone asked how long she planned to stay. Before Margaret could answer, Lauren laughed lightly. "Oh, we're still figuring that out." The neighbors smiled politely. Lauren continued, "We're just trying to help her get back on her feet." Margaret felt heat rise in her face. Get back on her feet, as though she were some charity case. Not a homeowner who had sold her own house, not a woman with savings, not a woman who had spent decades building a life, just someone being helped. Margaret smiled anyway, because correcting Lauren in front of guests would only create a scene. But later that night, she opened her notebook again. This time she added another entry. "Lauren speaking for me." Again, she underlined the last word twice. The next morning, something happened that finally made her stop dismissing her concerns. She checked the mailbox before Lauren could reach it. Inside sat 3 envelopes, 2 advertisements, and 1 bank envelope addressed directly to Margaret Hale. She stared at it. Why hadn't she seen one of these in months? Slowly, she slipped the envelope into her sweater pocket and carried it upstairs. Then she closed her bedroom door. The letter inside was only 1 page long. Yet by the time she finished reading it, her heartbeat had noticeably accelerated, because she did not recognize the transaction being referenced. And at the bottom of the page in small print was a phrase she had never seen before. "Pending trust transfer review." Margaret read the line again, then again. A trust. What trust? And why was her name attached to it? Downstairs, she heard the front door open. Daniel had come home early, his voice carried through the hallway. "Mom?" Margaret looked at the letter in her trembling hands, then at the business card she had placed on her nightstand the day before. Charles Whitaker. A few seconds later, her phone suddenly rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Margaret answered cautiously. "Hello?" There was a brief pause, then a calm male voice spoke. "Mrs. Hale, this is Charles Whitaker." Margaret froze. "I was wondering," he said quietly, "when you'd finally call." Margaret stood in the guest room with the bank letter in one hand and the phone pressed against her ear, unable to answer for several seconds. Charles Whitaker's voice had not changed much. Calm, careful, almost too steady. It was the kind of voice Arthur had trusted with things he never wanted to explain over dinner, Mrs. Hale, Charles said gently. "Yes," Margaret managed. I'm here. I didn't mean to startle you. You did. There was a pause on the line, not awkward, but measured. Charles had always been a man who left space around difficult things. Margaret looked toward the closed bedroom door, then lowered her voice. How did you know to call me? The bank notified my office this morning that correspondence connected to the Hale Family Trust had been issued to your current address, he said. Your husband left instructions that if certain notices were sent, I was to follow up with you directly. Margaret tightened her grip on the letter. What trust? Another silence followed. This one felt heavier. I think that conversation should happen in person, Charles said. Before Margaret could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. She turned quickly toward the door. Daniel's voice came from downstairs, closer now. Mom? Are you up there? Margaret's heartbeat jumped. She folded the bank letter once, too quickly, bending the corner. Then she slipped it inside the old poetry book on the nightstand, the one Lauren never touched because she said old books collected dust. I can't talk right now, Margaret whispered. I understand, Charles said. Do you still have identification documents with you? Driver's license, social security card, financial records? Margaret glanced toward the closet where 2 storage boxes sat behind her suitcase. Yes. Keep them where only you can access them. And Mrs. Hale, yes, until we speak, please do not sign anything Daniel or Lauren places in front of you. The way he said their names made her stomach tighten. Not suspiciously, not accusingly, but knowingly. Daniel knocked on the door before she could ask another question. Mom? I have to go, she whispered. Call my office from a private line when you can, Charles said. Not from Daniel's phone. Not from Lauren's. The call ended just as Daniel opened the door halfway. Margaret lowered the phone slowly. Daniel stood there in his work shirt, tie loosened, laptop bag still over one shoulder. His eyes moved from her face to the phone, then back again. Who was that? He asked. Margaret forced her expression into something ordinary. A wrong number. Daniel gave a small laugh, but it did not reach his eyes. You look pretty serious for a wrong number. It startled me. He stepped into the room without asking. That bothered her more than it should have. This was not her house, but this was supposed to be her room. Even that small boundary seemed to blur more every week. I came home early, he said. Lauren said you seemed tired this morning. I'm fine. She worries about you. Margaret looked at him carefully. Daniel had always been good at saying Lauren's opinions as if they were neutral facts. Lauren worries. Lauren thinks. Lauren noticed. Somewhere along the way, her son had become the messenger for his wife's control. I know she does, Margaret said. Daniel walked toward the nightstand and Margaret felt her body stiffen. The poetry book lay there, harmless and closed, hiding the bank letter between pages of poems Arthur used to read aloud on rainy Sundays. Daniel picked up her medication bottle instead. Did you take your afternoon dose? Yes, you sure? Margaret looked at him. Daniel, I can manage my medication. His face softened in that familiar way that made correction feel like concern. I know, Mom. I'm just checking. But he was not just checking. Not anymore. Checking had become watching. Watching had become deciding. That evening, Lauren made grilled salmon and steamed vegetables for dinner. She placed Margaret's plate down last, already portioned smaller than the others. I gave you less salt, Lauren said. Better for inflammation. Margaret smiled faintly. Thank you. Daniel barely spoke through dinner. Lauren did most of the talking, describing a billing issue at work, then complaining about the price of groceries. She did not mention Margaret directly, but she did not need to. Her eyes flicked toward Margaret's plate when she said the word expensive. After dinner, Margaret reached for her plate. I can wash these, she said. Lauren took it from her hand before she could stand. No, you should rest. I've been resting all day. That's the point. Lauren smiled tightly. Recovery takes discipline. Margaret let go of the plate. She heard the words beneath the words. Sit down. Stay quiet. Be grateful. Later that night, Margaret waited until the house had gone still. Daniel and Lauren's bedroom door closed at 10:30. The television stopped murmuring downstairs at 11. By 11:15, the hallway was dark. Margaret moved slowly, careful with her knee. She retrieved the bank letter from the poetry book and placed it on the bed. Then she opened the closet and pulled out the smaller of her 2 storage boxes. Inside were folders from Cleveland, house sale documents, medical bills, insurance summaries, a few old bank statements. She had packed them herself before Daniel insisted most of her files could be stored somewhere safer. That phrase bothered her now. Somewhere safer. She searched until she found a zippered pouch containing her passport, birth certificate, social security card, and Arthur's death certificate. Relief came first. Then shame followed it. She hated that she felt relieved to find her own identity papers. She took photographs of each document with her phone, then emailed the images to an old account Daniel did not know she still used. Arthur had helped her create it years earlier for travel reservations and medical portals. She had almost forgotten about it until that moment. Then she photographed the bank letter, pending trust transfer review. Her hands trembled when she zoomed in on the phrase. The words still meant little to her, but she understood enough to know one thing. Something had been happening with her name attached to it, and no one in this house had told her. The next morning, Lauren was already in the kitchen when Margaret came downstairs. A planner lay open beside her coffee cup. Colored tabs marked the pages: bills, appointments, meals, household tasks. Lauren loved systems. She loved them even more when other people had to live inside them. "Good morning," Margaret said. Lauren looked up with a bright smile. "Morning. I made oatmeal. I thought I might make myself eggs." Lauren's smile paused. "Eggs are a little heavy with your medication." "My doctor never said that." "No, but common sense helps." Lauren closed the planner halfway. "Besides, I already made breakfast." Margaret stood still for a moment. It was a small thing. Eggs, oatmeal, nothing worth fighting about, not to someone watching from outside. But inside that kitchen, it felt like another inch of her life being moved out of reach. "I'll have tea," Margaret said. Lauren's eyes sharpened slightly. "Just tea?" "Yes, that isn't enough. It's what I want." The silence that followed was brief but real. Lauren looked at her as if Margaret had broken some unspoken rule. Then Daniel entered, saving his wife from having to answer. "Morning," he said, kissing Lauren's cheek before looking at his mother. "You sleep okay?" "Well enough." He poured coffee and reached for the mail stacked near Lauren's planner. Margaret noticed the motion immediately. 3 envelopes sat there. Daniel picked them up, sorted them, and slid one into his laptop bag without looking at her. "Anything for me?" Margaret asked. Daniel's hands stopped. Lauren looked down at her planner. "Just junk, I think," Daniel said. Margaret kept her voice calm. "You didn't look." He gave a quick smile. "Mom, I know what your mail looks like by now." The sentence landed softly, but it landed. Her mail, her name, her records, and somehow he believed he had the right to decide what mattered. Margaret held his gaze. "From now on, I'd like to see anything addressed to me." Daniel's smile faded a little. "Of course." Lauren's pen tapped once against the planner. "That might make things more confusing, Margaret. Some of those statements are just duplicates. Daniel's only trying to keep things organized." "I appreciate that," Margaret said. "But I'd still like to see them." Daniel glanced at Lauren. It lasted less than a second, but Margaret saw it. A silent exchange, a warning, a calculation. Then Daniel nodded. "Sure, Mom." He said the right words, but his tone was wrong. That afternoon, Margaret waited until Lauren left for a hair appointment. Daniel had gone back to work after lunch. For the first time all day, the house belonged to silence. She took her purse, her identification pouch, and the bank letter. Then she called a rideshare from the old email account instead of asking Lauren for a ride. When the car arrived, Margaret moved carefully down the walkway, leaning on her cane. She felt guilty for sneaking out of her own son's house. Then she corrected herself. She was not sneaking. She was leaving without asking permission. There was a difference. She did not go far, only to a small copy shop beside a pharmacy. There, she made physical copies of the bank letter, her identification, and the oldest bank statement she still had from before she moved. She bought a plain folder and wrote nothing on it. On the way back, she asked the driver to stop at a mailbox. She placed one envelope inside, addressed to herself at a P.O. box rental location she planned to open the next day. The other envelope was addressed to Charles Whitaker's office. Inside was a copy of the bank letter and a handwritten note. "I received this at Daniel's house. I have not signed anything. Please advise." When she returned, Lauren's car was already in the driveway. Margaret felt a flicker of fear, then hated herself for it. Lauren stood in the kitchen when she entered. Her sunglasses were still on top of her head, her arms folded across her cream sweater. "Where were you?" Lauren asked. Margaret hung her purse carefully on the chair. "Running an errand. You should have told me. Daniel and I need to know where you are in case something happens." "I'm recovering from surgery, Lauren." "I'm not missing." Lauren's face tightened. "That's not fair." "No," Margaret said quietly. "It isn't." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Lauren's eyes dropped to Margaret's purse. "What kind of errand?" Margaret smiled gently. "A personal one." The word personal seemed to irritate Lauren more than an argument would have. That evening, Daniel came home tense. He kissed Lauren, set his bag down, and asked Margaret if they could all talk after dinner. Lauren had clearly told him about the errand. Margaret expected a lecture. Instead, after dinner, Lauren placed a neat folder on the table. "We've been meaning to simplify some things," Lauren said, "for everyone's peace of mind." Daniel sat beside her, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his water glass. Margaret looked at the folder but did not touch it. "What things?" she asked. "Household expectations," Lauren said. "Medical contacts, emergency procedures, financial communication, nothing dramatic." Daniel cleared his throat. "It's just so we're all on the same page." Lauren slid the folder closer. Margaret opened it. The first page looked harmless enough. Contact numbers, pharmacy information, physical therapy schedule. Then she turned to the second page. Her eyes stopped on the title, Household Support and Financial Responsibility Agreement. Beneath it, her full legal name had already been typed. Margaret stared at the title on the second page for a long moment, letting the words settle into her mind one at a time. Household Support and Financial Responsibility Agreement. Her full legal name sat beneath it in neat black print. Margaret Elaine Hale. Not mom, not Danchville's mother, not a guest recovering from surgery. A party to an agreement, a woman being placed into a role without ever being asked. She did not pick up the pen. Daniel shifted in his chair. Lauren sat across from her with her hands folded, watching Margaret's face closely. "It looks more formal than it is," Lauren said. "It's really just a way to make expectations clear." Margaret turned the page slowly. Her knee ached under the table, but she did not move. She read the first paragraph twice. The language was polite, but the meaning was not. It stated that Margaret was residing in the home of Daniel and Lauren Hale while receiving assistance with meals, transportation, medical care, and financial organization. The phrase "receiving assistance" appeared 3 times. She looked up. "Who wrote this?" Lauren answered too quickly. "I drafted it." Daniel cleared his throat. Lauren thought it might help. "With what?" "With structure," Lauren said. "Things have felt a little loose lately." Margaret looked down again. The next section listed a proposed monthly contribution for household expenses, groceries, utilities, transportation, administrative support. That last phrase made something inside her go cold. "Administrative support," Margaret said. Lauren gave a small smile. "Daniel spends a lot of time helping with your paperwork. It's not unreasonable to acknowledge that." Daniel looked uncomfortable, but he did not correct her. Margaret kept reading. The document did not demand a huge amount of money, not compared with what she assumed remained in her accounts. That was not what frightened her. What frightened her was the shape of it. The paper created a story. It made Daniel and Lauren look like caretakers. It made Margaret look dependent. She remembered Charles's voice. "Do not sign anything Daniel or Lauren places in front of you." Margaret folded the document closed and placed both hands on top of it. "I'm not signing this tonight." Lauren's smile thinned. "No one is pressuring you. You put it in front of me after dinner." Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, it's just to help us keep things fair." "Fair," Margaret repeated softly. He looked away first. Lauren's tone became gentler, which Margaret had learned was not always a good sign. "Margaret, this isn't an attack. You've been through a lot. Surgery, selling the house, moving here. Sometimes people don't realize how much others are carrying for them." There it was, the soft blade beneath the velvet. Margaret pushed the folder back toward Lauren. "Then I'll review it with someone before I decide anything." Lauren's eyebrows lifted. "Someone?" "My attorney." Daniel's head came up. The room changed, not loudly. No one gasped, no one shouted. But Margaret felt the shift as clearly as if a window had opened in winter. Lauren looked at Daniel, then back at Margaret. "You have an attorney?" Margaret kept her voice even. "Arthur and I had one." Daniel tried to laugh. "Mom, that seems unnecessary." "Maybe. This is a family matter." Margaret looked at her son. "Then it should have been discussed like one." The words landed harder than she expected. Daniel's face tightened. Lauren picked up the folder and aligned the edges against the table, a quick, irritated motion she tried to hide. "Of course," Lauren said. "Take your time." But later that night, Margaret heard their voices through the vent near her room. She had not gone to bed. She had sat in the chair by the window, the copied bank letter tucked inside her robe pocket, waiting for the house to settle. At first, she told herself she was being foolish. Then Lauren's voice rose just enough to carry. "She's calling an attorney now?" Daniel said something too low to hear. Lauren answered sharply. "No, Daniel, that is not fine. That means she's suspicious." Margaret's hands tightened around the arms of the chair. Daniel's voice came clearer. "She doesn't know anything, are you sure?" A pause. "I said I'm handling it." Lauren laughed once, cold and humorless. "That's what you said about the mail." Margaret stopped, breathing for a moment. The mail, so Lauren knew. Daniel muttered something, and Margaret leaned closer to the vent, hating that she had to listen inside her own son's house like a stranger. Lauren spoke again. "If that bank letter was what I think it was, we need to move faster." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Keep your voice down, then fix it. It's not that simple." It was simple when you told me your mother would sign whatever you put in front of her. The words struck Margaret so hard that her eyes filled before she could stop them. Not because Lauren had said it. Margaret had already begun to understand Lauren. It hurt because Daniel did not deny it right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "She trusts me," Lauren answered immediately. "Then use that." Margaret sat very still until the voices faded. For a long time afterward, she did not move. She did not cry either. The tears had come, but they had not fallen. Something stronger had stopped them, not pride, not anger, something older and steadier. Arthur would have called it self-respect. The next morning, Margaret waited until Daniel left for work and Lauren went upstairs for a video meeting. Then she moved, slowly, carefully, with purpose. She took the household agreement from the kitchen drawer where Lauren had left it. She placed it flat on the counter and photographed every page with her phone. Then she returned it exactly as she had found it, down to the angle of the folder against the wooden divider. After that, she opened her notebook. June 3. Lauren drafted Household Support and Financial Responsibility Agreement. Daniel present. I refused to sign. Later heard them discuss mail and bank letter. Lauren said Daniel told her I would sign whatever he put in front of me. Her hand trembled by the end, but the words were legible. She read the entry once. Then she added one more sentence. "I am not confused." The simple sentence steadied her. Just before noon, Margaret called Charles Whitaker's office from the guest room with the door locked. His receptionist answered first, then placed her on hold. Less than a minute later, Charles came on the line. "Mrs. Hale, I received another document," Margaret said. "What kind?" "A household support agreement." Lauren drafted it. "It says I'm receiving assistance with meals, transportation, medical care, and financial organization. It asks for a monthly contribution." Charles did not interrupt. She heard only the soft scratch of a pen. "Did you sign it?" "No." "Good." The single word gave her more comfort than it should have. "I also heard them talking last night," she continued. Lauren said if the bank letter was what she thought it was, they needed to move faster. Charles was silent for a moment. "Did she say move faster with what?" "No." "Did Daniel?" "No, but she said he told her I would sign whatever he put in front of me." This time Charles's pause lasted longer. "Mrs. Hale, I want you to listen carefully. I'm not accusing Daniel of anything yet. But from this point forward, treat every financial document as important. Do not sign. Do not initial. Do not verbally agree to anything involving accounts, property, trusts, reimbursements, support, or household obligations." Margaret swallowed. "What is happening?" "I don't have enough to say yet. That means you suspect something. It means I have seen families create paper trails before they make larger moves." The phrase made her stomach tighten. Paper trails. "That agreement," Charles continued, "could be harmless. It could also be used later to suggest you accepted a dependent role in their household." Margaret closed her eyes. Lauren's careful language suddenly made sense. Receiving assistance, administrative support, medical care, financial organization. It was not just insulting. It was useful. "I want to meet," Charles said, "in person, tomorrow if possible." Margaret looked toward the door. "I may have trouble getting there without them knowing." "Then tell them you have a follow-up appointment related to your surgery." "I don't like lying." "You don't owe full access to people who may be restricting your access to your own records." Margaret opened her eyes. That sentence settled deep. After the call, she sat quietly on the edge of the bed. For months, she had treated discomfort as something to endure. A strained smile here, a swallowed comment there. Another small loss of independence explained away as care. But now each small thing had begun connecting to something larger. That afternoon, Lauren knocked on her door and entered before Margaret answered. "I wanted to check in," Lauren said brightly. "Daniel told me you seemed upset last night." Margaret looked up from the book in her lap. "Daniel said that? He worries." Margaret marked her page slowly. "Does he?" Lauren ignored the edge in her voice. "About the agreement. I hope you didn't take it personally." "How else should I take a document about my financial responsibility?" Lauren stepped farther into the room. "Honestly? Maturely." Margaret held her gaze. Lauren smiled, but her eyes had hardened. "We all have responsibilities. You sold your house, you moved here, and Daniel has carried a great deal for you. I know no one likes to talk about money, but pretending things are free doesn't make them free." Margaret felt the insult before it fully arrived. She set the book down. "I paid my own way for 69 years, Lauren. No one is denying that." Lauren's voice softened again, "But things are different now." Margaret looked at the woman standing inside her temporary room, speaking as if she owned not only the house but the truth. "Yes," Margaret said quietly, "they are." Lauren seemed dissatisfied with that answer. Her eyes moved around the room, landing briefly on the closet, then on Margaret's purse beside the chair. Daniel mentioned you might be looking for older financial papers, Lauren said. Margaret's pulse quickened, but she kept her face still. Did he? He just doesn't want you getting overwhelmed. Some of those records are outdated. I'll decide what I need. Lauren's mouth tightened. Of course. After Lauren left, Margaret waited 10 full minutes. Then she opened the closet. The smaller storage box was where she had left it. The larger one was not. For several seconds, she simply stared at the empty space behind her suitcase. Then she searched the closet again, slower this time. Nothing. The box containing her older Cleveland records, house sale documents, and years of bank statements was gone. Margaret lowered herself carefully into the chair. Her fear returned, sharper now. Not because papers were missing. Because someone in that house had known exactly which box mattered. She reached for her phone and opened the photographs she had taken the night before. The bank letter was still there. Her identification was backed up, the agreement pages were saved, but the original records were gone. Downstairs, Lauren's voice floated from the kitchen, light and casual, as if nothing had happened. Margaret opened her notebook with steady hands and wrote one line, June 4, the larger document box is missing. Then her phone buzzed. A new email had arrived from an address she did not recognize. The subject line made her blood run cold. Final notice, trust asset transfer review scheduled. Margaret sat in the chair with the phone in her hand, staring at the email subject until the words blurred. Final notice, trust asset transfer review scheduled. For a moment she could hear Lauren moving downstairs. A cabinet opened. A drawer slid shut. The normal sounds of the house continued as if nothing important had happened. That almost made it worse. Someone had removed her document box. Someone had known enough to hide the records that might help her understand what was happening. And now a notice had arrived telling her that a review had already been scheduled. Scheduled by whom? She opened the email carefully. It was not from the bank directly. The sender line showed an automated notification from a financial document portal. The message was short. It said a trust asset transfer review meeting had been scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m., and that all authorized parties should ensure identification and supporting documents were available. All authorized parties. Margaret read the sentence twice. Her name appeared below, along with Daniel's. There was no explanation of what asset was being reviewed, no details about the amount, no copy of the request, just a reference number and a link to sign in. She did not click the link. Arthur had taught her that much. If a financial email frightened you, never press anything inside it. Go through the proper office. Use a number you already trust. She took a screenshot of the email, then forwarded it to the old account Daniel did not know. After that, she forwarded it to Charles Whitaker's office with one sentence. This just arrived. My large document box is missing. Only then did she stand. Her knee protested, but she ignored it. She crossed the room, locked the bedroom door, and opened every drawer she still controlled. Her passport pouch remained hidden inside the lining of her suitcase. Her copied folder was still beneath the stack of sweaters. Her notebook was under the mattress where she had placed it that morning. Those small things steadied her. She still had proof. She still had her own mind. She still had choices. Downstairs, Lauren laughed at something on the phone, light and casual. Margaret listened from the top of the stairs. She could not hear every word, but she caught enough. No, she's fine, Lauren said. Just emotional lately. The surgery really took a lot out of her. Margaret's hand tightened on the rail. Lauren continued, lower now. Daniel is handling the financial side. Honestly, it's better that way. She gets overwhelmed. Margaret moved back from the stairs before anger could make her careless. A few minutes later, Charles called. She answered before the second ring. Mrs. Hale, he said. I received your email. My box is gone. What was in it? House sale papers, older bank statements, insurance records, some tax documents. I don't know what else. Daniel helped pack things when I moved, but I kept that box in my closet. Did you give anyone permission to remove it? No. Do you have proof it was there? Margaret glanced toward the closet. No photograph. But I listed it in my notebook when I unpacked. That helps. Not perfectly, but it helps. She closed her eyes. What is this transfer review? I can't fully answer until I see the underlying request, Charles said, but the language suggests a formal review of assets inside the Hale family trust. Margaret sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Why didn't I know about this trust? Another careful pause. Arthur intended to tell you more after his health improved, Charles said. He created the structure before his final illness became severe. He wanted certain assets protected. Some were meant to support you. Some were structured to help Daniel under limited circumstances. Margaret swallowed. Arthur's name still hurt when spoken in legal sentences. Did Daniel know? He knew a trust existed. He may not know every protection inside it. May not. I don't want to speculate. But Charles's tone told her he had already begun doing exactly that. I need to see you, he said, tomorrow morning. My office. Bring identification, the bank letter, and any copies you have. If you can't bring originals, bring photos. Lauren will ask where I'm going. Tell her the truth, but not all of it. You have a private appointment regarding your financial records. That is accurate. Margaret almost smiled. Arthur would have liked that answer. After the call ended, she looked around the room. For the first time since moving into Daniel's house, the furniture seemed different. The bed, the lamp, the curtains Lauren had chosen because they matched the house. None of it belonged to Margaret. Even her privacy seemed borrowed. She opened her rideshare app and scheduled a car for 9 the next morning. Then she placed Charles's business card inside her shoe. It felt foolish for half a second. Then she remembered the missing box and stopped feeling foolish. At dinner that night, Lauren watched her too closely. Daniel came home late, already tense. He kissed Lauren on the cheek, then glanced at Margaret. His eyes lingered on her face as if searching for signs of what she knew. Dinner was chicken, rice, and roasted carrots. Lauren spoke about errands. Daniel replied in short sentences. Margaret ate slowly and said little. Finally, Daniel set down his fork. Mom, Lauren said you seemed upset earlier. Margaret looked at him. My document box is missing. The silence was immediate. Lauren's expression changed first, not surprise. Irritation. What document box, she asked. The larger one from my closet, Daniel frowned. Are you sure you didn't move it? Margaret held his gaze. Yes. You've been sorting through things lately, Lauren said. Maybe you misplaced it. It was a box, Lauren. Not a pair of reading glasses. Daniel shifted. Mom. The warning in his voice was small but clear. Margaret turned to him. Did you take it? He looked offended. Too quickly. No. Did you move it? No. Did Lauren? Lauren gave a short laugh. Margaret, I don't go through your things. Margaret thought of Lauren entering her room without waiting, looking at the closet, looking at her purse. She did not argue. Not yet. I need it back, she said. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We'll look for it. When? Tomorrow. I have an appointment tomorrow morning. Lauren's eyes sharpened. What appointment? A private one. Daniel set his fork down completely. With who? Margaret took a sip of water. Her hand was steady. She noticed that and felt quietly proud. With Charles Whitaker. Lauren's face went still. Daniel stared at his mother. Why? Because my financial records are missing and I received a notice about a trust asset review I didn't schedule. The words sat between them like a glass breaking, though nothing had moved. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Lauren recovered first. That sounds like a misunderstanding. These notices are automated. You don't need to run to a lawyer every time an email confuses you. It didn't confuse me. Margaret, please. The softness was back, but this time Margaret heard the fear beneath it. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, Charles handles old estate paperwork. He doesn't need to be involved in household issues. This isn't a household issue. You don't even know what it is yet. That's why I'm going. Lauren's voice cooled. This is exactly what I meant about stress. At your age, complicated documents can make things seem more alarming than they are. Margaret placed her napkin beside her plate, slowly, carefully. My age did not remove my right to ask questions. Daniel looked down. Lauren did not. For a brief second, Margaret saw the real face beneath her daughter-in-law's careful concern. Annoyed, cornered, displeased that the old woman at her table had not stayed in the role assigned to her. Margaret stood. Her knee ached sharply, but she stayed upright. I'm tired, she said. Good night. No one stopped her. In the hallway, she heard Lauren whisper, You need to talk to her before that appointment. Daniel answered, I will. Margaret kept walking. She locked her bedroom door behind her and placed a chair beneath the knob. It was not much. A determined person could move it, but the act itself mattered. A boundary, however small, was still a boundary. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. The chair was still beneath the doorknob. Her purse was packed. Her copies were hidden inside a pharmacy bag beneath a bottle of aspirin. Her phone was fully charged. At 8:30, Daniel knocked. Mom, can we talk before you go? Margaret sat on the bed, already dressed. Not now. It won't take long, I said, not now. A pause followed. Then Daniel tried the knob. It did not open. Margaret stared at the door. For the first time, her son had tested whether she meant no. Mom, he said quietly, why is the door blocked? She did not answer. After a long moment, his footsteps retreated. Her rideshare arrived at 9. Margaret waited until she heard Daniel and Lauren arguing downstairs, then moved carefully. She took the pharmacy bag, her purse, and her cane. At the bottom of the stairs, Daniel turned from the kitchen. "Mom, don't do this," he said. She looked at him. "Do what? Make this bigger than it needs to be." Margaret opened the front door. It already is. Charles Whitaker's office sat in a brick building with dark green awnings and old brass lettering on the glass door. The receptionist recognized her name immediately and led her into a conference room instead of the waiting area. Charles entered 5 minutes later with a folder already in his hand. He was older than she remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, kind. "Careful, Mrs. Hale," he said, taking her hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I." They sat across from each other. Margaret placed the pharmacy bag on the table and removed the copies one by one. Charles reviewed them without speaking: the banklet letter, the email, the household agreement, her notebook entries. He spent the longest time on the email about the scheduled review. Finally, he leaned back. "This is more serious than I hoped." Margaret felt her pulse slow in a terrible way. "Tell me." Charles opened his folder. "Your husband created the Hale Family Trust to protect certain assets after his death. You are the primary beneficiary. Daniel has limited administrative authority, but only within boundaries." Margaret stared at him. "Primary beneficiary, yes. Then why is Daniel's name on that review?" "Because Daniel is listed as a secondary trustee for certain limited functions. And this transfer?" Charles placed a document in front of her. "I requested preliminary information from the bank after your first call. They sent a summary, not the full file yet." Margaret looked down. She saw Daniel's name. Then she saw a transfer request number matching the email, and below it a line that made her mouth go dry. "Request initiated by Daniel R. Hale, trustee." Charles's voice remained calm, but his words were not. "Margaret, this request did not begin at the bank. It began with your son." Margaret looked at the document Charles had placed in front of her, but for several seconds the words refused to arrange themselves into meaning. Daniel's name was there. The request number matched the notice she had received. The phrase trustee appeared beside his signature line, clean and official, as though paperwork could make betrayal look respectable. Charles did not rush her. He sat across the conference table with his hands folded, giving her the dignity of silence. That kindness nearly undid her. For days, she had been watched, corrected, questioned, and managed inside Daniel's house. Now, in a lawyer's office, holding proof that her own son had started a transfer she did not understand, she felt more human than she had in months. "What exactly did he request?" she asked. Charles turned the document slightly toward himself. "The full file has not arrived yet, but this summary indicates a proposed reallocation of trust assets." "Reallocation," Margaret repeated. "It means moving assets from one structure into another. Into whose control?" Charles hesitated just long enough for her to feel the answer before he spoke. "That is what we need to determine." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. She saw Daniel at the kitchen table. Daniel asking if she had taken her medication. Daniel sorting her mail. Daniel saying Charles did not need to be involved in household issues. Each memory shifted now, becoming less like concern and more like preparation. "And he could do this without telling me?" she asked. "He could initiate a request within his limited trustee role," Charles said carefully. "He cannot complete a major transfer without proper authorization. That distinction matters." "Authorization from me?" "Yes." Margaret opened her eyes. The room was quiet. Through the window, traffic moved along the street below. People walked past carrying coffee, briefcases, grocery bags. Ordinary lives moving forward while hers seemed to be splitting into before and after. "Arthur made me the primary beneficiary," she said. "He did. Why didn't he tell me?" Charles looked down briefly. He planned to. His illness moved faster than he expected. He also believed Daniel would act responsibly if the need arose. A painful laugh left Margaret before she could stop it. Arthur always wanted to believe the best. He also planned for the worst. Charles opened another folder, thicker than the first. Inside were copies of trust pages marked with colored tabs. Margaret recognized Arthur's signature immediately. Her throat tightened. The sight of his careful handwriting brought back the man himself, not in some grand memory, but in small details. His reading glasses left crooked on the newspaper, his habit of circling dates on the calendar, his quiet belief that love and planning were not opposites. Charles tapped one section. "This clause gives you broad protection. Any transfer above a certain threshold requires your informed approval, not just a signature, informed approval." Margaret looked at him. "Then why do I feel like someone is trying to get only the signature?" Charles's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened, because that may be exactly what is happening. The words were calm, but they struck hard. Margaret reached into her purse and removed the folded copy of Lauren's household agreement. She slid it across the table. Would this matter? Charles read through the pages slowly. The longer he read, the tighter his mouth became. This is troubling, he said. Because it asks for money? No, because of the language. Assistance with medical care, financial organization, administrative support, household dependence. He looked up at her. Mrs. Hales, if someone later wanted to argue that Daniel had effectively been managing your affairs because you could not, this document would help them build that story. Margaret felt cold move through her. I didn't sign it. That was very wise. I almost didn't understand why it bothered me so much. You understood enough. That sentence steadied her more than comfort would have. She had understood enough. Her instinct had not been confusion. It had been warning. Charles made copies of everything she had brought. He also asked her to sign a limited authorization, allowing his office to request trust records directly from the bank and to communicate with her using her old email address and a new mailing address once she opened the P.O. box. This does not change the trust, he explained. It only lets me obtain information and advise you. Margaret read the form carefully before signing, every line, every word. Charles waited without comment. When she finally placed the pen down, she felt a small piece of herself return. Good, Charles said. From this point forward, I recommend you document every interaction involving money, mail, documents, medical decisions, housing, or pressure to sign. I've already started. I thought you might have. For the first time that morning, Margaret almost smiled. Before she left, Charles handed her a plain envelope. Inside were copies of the key trust pages and his direct office number written on a card. Keep this somewhere safe, he said. Not in Daniel's house if you can avoid it. Margaret nodded. I'll open the P.O. box today. And Mrs. Hale? She paused at the door. If Daniel asks what we discussed, you are not obligated to give him details. That sounded simple. It was not. Daniel was still her son. The man who had once sat beside Arthur at holiday dinners and helped carry grocery bags from the car. The man she had trusted because trust had always seemed natural between them. Not answering him would feel like betrayal, even after what he had done, but then she remembered his voice through the vent. She trusts me. Then use that. I understand, she said. The rideshare took her to a shipping store 2 blocks away. Margaret rented the smallest P.O. box available and paid in advance with a debit card Daniel had no access to. She gave Charles's office the new address before leaving. Then she stopped at the pharmacy next door and bought a small locking document pouch. By the time she returned to Daniel's house, it was mid-afternoon. Lauren was waiting in the living room. She stood when Margaret entered, her phone in one hand, her expression too composed. Daniel has been trying to reach you. Margaret checked her phone. 3 missed calls, 2 texts. Where are you? Please answer. Mom, we need to talk. I was at my appointment, Margaret said. Lauren's eyes dropped to the envelope tucked beneath Margaret's arm. With Charles. Yes. And it was private. Lauren gave a short laugh, but it was brittle. Margaret, you're living in our home. Things that affect the household affect us. This was about my records. Records Daniel has been helping you manage. I'm aware. Lauren stepped closer. Then you also need to be aware that bringing lawyers into family matters creates distrust. Margaret looked at her, really looked at her. The expensive sweater, the polished nails, the controlled face of a woman who used concern like furniture, placing it wherever it helped her own comfort. Taking my document box created distrust, Margaret said. Lauren's expression hardened. Again with the box. Yes, again. I told you I didn't take it. I didn't say you did, you implied it. Margaret held the envelope tighter. Then help me find it. Lauren's eyes flickered. It was brief. So brief that a week earlier Margaret might have missed it. But not now. Daniel can look when he gets home, Lauren said. Why not now? Because I have a work call. It will only take 10 minutes. Margaret. Lauren's voice sharpened. I am not stopping my day because you misplaced paperwork. The word misplaced did something to Margaret. It was not loud. It did not break anything, but it erased the last tiny piece of doubt she had been protecting on Lauren's behalf. Margaret nodded once. All right. She walked past her toward the stairs. Lauren called after her. You know, this is exactly why Daniel worries. You fixate on something, and then suddenly everyone else has to rearrange their lives around it. Margaret stopped with her hand on the railing. My papers are missing, she said without turning around. That is not fixation. Upstairs, she locked the guest room door and placed the new locking pouch inside the lining of her suitcase. Then she opened her notebook. June 5th, met with Charles. Daniel initiated trust asset transfer request. I am primary beneficiary. Lauren denied taking document box and refused to help search. I opened P.O. box. Do not sign anything. She stared at the final sentence. Do not sign anything. Then she underlined it. At 6:30, Daniel came home. Margaret heard his car, then the front door, then low voices downstairs. She did not go down immediately. She waited until Lauren called her for dinner. The table was already set. Daniel looked pale with anger or worry. Maybe both. "Mom," he said before she even sat, "why did you go to Charles?" Margaret lowered herself carefully into the chair. "Because I needed legal advice." "About what? My records?" His jaw tightened. "You could have asked me. I did ask about my mail. I asked about my missing box. I asked about the review notice." Daniel glanced at Lauren. "What review notice?" Margaret watched him closely. The trust asset transfer review scheduled for Tuesday. His face changed, only for a second, but enough. Lauren spoke quickly. "Is that what this is about?" "Daniel, didn't you say that was just an administrative update?" Margaret turned to her son. "Did you?" Daniel looked from Lauren to Margaret. "Mom, it's complicated. I'm listening." He rubbed a hand over his mouth. "It's not something you need to worry about yet." Yet. The word exposed more than he intended. Margaret placed her napkin in her lap. "Then when was I supposed to worry about it?" Daniel's voice dropped. When the final papers were ready, the table fell silent. There it was, not the whole truth, not even close, but enough to confirm the shape of the lie. Margaret sat back slowly. "So you did know." Daniel's eyes lowered. Lauren reached for her water glass. "Margaret, this is why we didn't want to overwhelm you. These things have stages." Margaret looked at her. "No, these things have signatures." Daniel flinched. For the rest of dinner, no one said much. But silence no longer belonged to them, not entirely. Margaret had carried it like a burden for months. Now she used it like a shield. After dinner, she went upstairs early. Halfway down the hall, she heard Daniel and Lauren in the kitchen. Lauren's voice was low but tense. "She knows too much." Daniel answered, "She doesn't know enough." "Then make sure she doesn't get the rest before Tuesday." Margaret stood motionless in the dark hallway. Tuesday, the review, the missing box, the agreement, the transfer Daniel had initiated. She backed quietly into her room and closed the door without making a sound. Then she took out her phone, opened her old email account, and sent one message to Charles. "They know I met you." Daniel admitted, "Final papers are coming. Lauren's to make sure I don't get the rest before Tuesday." She sent it. Then she opened her suitcase and removed the locking pouch. For the first time since arriving in Daniel's house, Margaret packed a small overnight bag, not to leave yet. Not because she was afraid of one argument, but because she had finally understood something Charles had not needed to say. If they were racing toward Tuesday, she needed to be ready before Monday night. Margaret did not sleep much that night. The overnight bag sat half hidden behind the armchair, packed with 2 changes of clothes, her medication, the copied documents, and the locking pouch. It was not enough to rebuild a life. It was enough to leave if staying became unsafe. That distinction mattered. At dawn, the house was quiet. Margaret sat at the small desk by the window and reviewed what she had gathered so far. The bank letter, the transfer review email, the household agreement, her notes about the missing document box, the summary Charles had shown her with Daniel's name on the request. Piece by piece, the picture had become harder to dismiss. She opened her notebook and wrote the date at the top of a clean page, June 6. Then she added one sentence. "I will not let them decide what I understand." The words made her sit a little straighter. Downstairs, a cabinet door closed harder than necessary. Lauren was awake. A few minutes later, Margaret heard Daniel's voice, low and tense. She moved to the doorway but did not open it. She no longer trusted the hallway as empty space. It had become a place where truths escaped by accident. "I told you not to push her last night," Daniel said. Lauren answered sharply. "She went to Charles because you waited too long." "I had it under control." "No, you didn't. She has copies now. She knows about Tuesday." Margaret pressed one hand against the doorframe. Daniel spoke again, quieter. "She doesn't know what the transfer is for, yet." The word settled into Margaret's chest. For, not what the transfer was, what it was for. That meant a purpose, a destination. A problem they needed solved. Lauren continued, "If she gets the full file before Tuesday, she'll refuse." Daniel sounded exhausted. "Maybe we should explain it." "And tell her what? That we need it because you couldn't keep the house stable? That the bank deadline is real? That everything you promised me was built on your mother's money?" Silence followed. Margaret stood very still. The house, the bank deadline, her money. Daniel finally said, "Keep your voice down." Lauren laughed bitterly. "That's always your answer. Keep my voice down. Hide the papers. Calm your mother. Smile through dinner." Well, smiling isn't going to fix the loan. Margaret stepped back from the door before her breathing betrayed her. Her hands were cold, not shaking. Just cold, alone. She had questions now that hurt to ask. What loan? How much? Why was her trust involved? And why had Daniel let Lauren speak about her as if she were an obstacle instead of his mother? She waited until the kitchen went quiet before leaving her room. When she came downstairs, Lauren was standing at the counter with a tablet. Daniel was gone. His coffee mug remained in the sink, half full. Lauren looked up. "Good morning." "Good morning." The politeness between them had become thinner than paper. "I made oatmeal," Lauren said. "I'll make my own breakfast." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Margaret, this again?" "Yes." Margaret opened the refrigerator and took out eggs. The simple act felt larger than it should have. She cracked 2 into a bowl while Lauren watched from the counter. "You know," Lauren said, "independence is wonderful, but stubbornness can look very similar." Margaret whisked the eggs. "I'll keep that in mind. Daniel's worried about you. Daniel is worried about Tuesday." Lauren went still. Margaret looked at her, bowl in hand. She had not planned to say it, but once the words were out, she did not regret them. Lauren placed her tablet down. "You shouldn't listen to private conversations. Then you shouldn't discuss my finances loudly enough for me to hear. They're not just your finances if they affect this household." "There it is," Margaret said softly. Lauren's face tightened. "What?" "The truth." For a moment, Lauren seemed ready to argue. Instead, she inhaled slowly and chose another voice, the concerned one. The one she wore like jewelry when she wanted control to look graceful. "Margaret, I know you think everyone is against you right now, but Daniel has carried a great deal since you came here. Your appointments, your paperwork, your recovery, your meals. It's been a lot." Margaret poured the eggs into a skillet. "Then he should have spoken to me like an adult." Lauren's mouth hardened. Adults also contribute. Margaret turned the burner lower. "Are we talking about breakfast or the trust?" Lauren did not answer. That silence was answer enough. After breakfast, Margaret went upstairs and called the bank, using the number printed on her old statement, not the email link. It took 2 transfers and 20 minutes on hold before she reached a senior account representative named Denise Caldwell. Margaret verified her identity carefully. She gave no more information than required. When Denise asked whether Daniel Hale was authorized to receive certain notices, Margaret paused. "That is what I need to understand," Margaret said. "What exactly can he access?" Denise's tone became more formal. "Mrs. Hale, I can confirm that Daniel R. Hale is listed with limited trustee access for certain trust-linked accounts. He is not the primary beneficiary." The words matched Charles, but hearing them from the bank made something inside Margaret settle. "Can he change where my statements are mailed?" There was a pause as Denise checked. A mailing address update was submitted 4 months ago for trust correspondence. Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone. Submitted by whom? "I can't disclose internal processing notes in detail over the phone without a formal records request, but I can say the update was not submitted through your online profile." Margaret looked toward her locked pouch. "Can I request duplicate statements sent to a P.O. box?" "Yes. We can set a beneficiary mailing preference after additional verification." Margaret completed the process. It took nearly half an hour. She also requested written confirmation of all the address changes and recent correspondence. Denise explained that some documents might require trustee review before release, depending on account type, but Margaret insisted on receiving whatever could legally be provided to the primary beneficiary. When the call ended, Margaret wrote everything down. June 6. Bank confirmed exchange 4 months ago, not submitted through my online profile. Duplicate statements requested to P.O. box. Confirmation pending. She photographed the page and emailed it to herself. Then she changed the password on her bank login. The old password had been one Arthur created years before. Daniel might not have known it, but after everything, might no longer felt safe. The new password was long, strange, and written on a slip of paper she placed inside her shoe with Charles's card. By noon, Daniel texted, "We need to talk tonight. Please don't make any more calls before then." Margaret stared at the message. There was no apology, no explanation, just a request wrapped around control. She took a screenshot and saved it. Then she replied with one sentence, "I will speak with you tonight, but I will continue protecting my records." The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. No answer came. That afternoon, while Lauren was outside on the patio speaking into her phone, Margaret went to the garage. She moved slowly between storage shelves stacked with seasonal decorations, bulk paper towels, old paint cans, and labeled bins that belonged to Lauren's careful household system. Her missing document box was not visible. But near the back wall, behind a folded card table, Margaret noticed a plastic storage tub she did not recognize. It had no label. Lauren labeled everything. That alone made it stand out. Margaret lifted the lid. Inside were file folders. For one breathless second, she thought she had found her box. But these were not her old records. They were Daniel's: mortgage statements, home equity line documents, credit card consolidation offers, a folder marked private lending, another marked renovation financing. Margaret did not remove anything. She used her phone to photograph the folder labels and the first page visible inside the home equity file. The balance line was enough to make her stomach tighten. It was not a small debt. Before she could take another photo, the door from the kitchen opened. "Margaret?" Lauren's voice cut through the garage. Margaret closed the tub and turned, phone still in her hand. Lauren stood in the doorway staring at her. "What are you doing?" Margaret slipped the phone into her cardigan pocket. "Looking for my missing box. That isn't yours." "No," Margaret said. "It appears not." Lauren stepped down into the garage. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup, though her voice stayed controlled. "You shouldn't go through Daniel's private financial papers." Margaret looked at her. "Interesting." Lauren's eyes flashed. "Excuse me. When my papers disappeared, I was told I had misplaced them. When Daniel's papers are in an unlabeled bin, suddenly privacy matters." Lauren took 2 steps closer. "You need to stop." "Stop what?" "Digging through things you don't understand." Margaret felt the insult land, but this time it did not make her shrink. It made her clearer. "I understand debt," she said. "I understand deadlines. And I understand when people start needing someone else's money badly enough to hide it." Lauren's face hardened completely. "You have no idea what Daniel has sacrificed for you." Margaret held her gaze. "Then he can explain it himself." That evening, dinner was not served at the table. Lauren claimed she had a headache and stayed upstairs. Daniel found Margaret in the living room, sitting with her notebook closed beside her. He looked exhausted, older than he had that morning. "Mom," he said, "Lauren told me you went through my financial files. I was looking for my missing records. You had no right." Margaret looked up at him slowly. "Then return what belongs to me." Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "I don't have your box." "Who does?" "I don't know, but he said it too fast." Margaret said nothing. Daniel sat across from her. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to tell the truth. Then fear, shame, or habit pulled him back. "There are things you don't understand," he said. "Then explain them." "I can't. Not yet. Because of Tuesday?" His eyes met hers. The truth passed between them without being spoken. Margaret reached for her notebook and opened it to a blank page. Daniel watched the movement. "What are you doing? Writing this down?" His voice sharpened. "Mom, don't turn this into some legal case." Margaret looked at her son, the man who had begun a trust transfer behind her back and still wanted the comfort of her silence. "I'm not turning it into anything," she said. "I'm keeping track of what it already is." Daniel stood abruptly. "This is going to hurt all of us." "No," Margaret said quietly. "Hiding it did that." He stared at her, then walked away. Later that night, Margaret's phone buzzed with an email from Charles. The bank released a partial transaction summary. "Call me in the morning. Do not discuss this with Daniel yet." Attached was a single PDF. Margaret opened it with shaking hands. Most of the numbers meant little at first. Then one line caught her eye. Discretionary withdrawal, $18,750. Purpose code, residential debt service. Date, 3 months earlier. Margaret covered her mouth with one hand. Daniel had not only initiated a future transfer, money had already moved. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed with the phone glowing in her hand, unable to look away from the line in the PDF. Discretionary withdrawal, $18,750. Purpose code, residential debt service. The words were not emotional, they were not cruel. That was what made them feel so cold. A bank system had reduced betrayal to a category, residential debt service. As if the money had simply moved from one place to another in an orderly, reasonable way. As if it had not come from the protected trust Arthur created with her future in mind. She took a screenshot, then another. Then she forwarded the PDF to her old email and saved a copy in the cloud folder Arthur had once set up for tax documents. Her hands were shaking now, but her thinking had become clear. Money had already moved. Daniel had known. Lauren had known enough to panic. And Margaret had been sitting at their dinner table while they discussed groceries, utilities, and how much she cost them. She opened her notebook and wrote the transaction exactly as it appeared. Date, amount, purpose code, source. She did not add how it made her feel. Not yet. Feelings could be challenged. Numbers were harder to dismiss. Only after she finished writing did she allow herself to breathe. Downstairs, the house was silent. Daniel had retreated somewhere after their argument. Lauren had not appeared again. That silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like people waiting for the next move. The next morning, Margaret called Charles before breakfast. He answered quickly. "You saw the summary." "Yes, I'm sorry. Was it allowed?" Charles paused. She had learned to dislike his pauses. They meant the truth needed careful handling, possibly within Daniel's limited discretionary authority, he said. That does not mean it was appropriate. It depends on what the trust terms allowed, what justification he gave, and whether the withdrawal benefited the intended purpose of the trust. It paid his house debt. That appears to be the coded purpose. Then why was he letting Lauren talk about me like I was costing them money? Charles did not answer immediately. Margaret looked toward the bedroom door. She could hear Lauren moving in the kitchen, pans touching the stove, coffee brewing, the normal sounds of a morning pretending to be normal. Mrs. Hale, Charles said, I need the full transaction file before I can advise you properly. I've requested it. In the meantime, document everything. If they pressure you, delay. If they present papers, don't sign. Tuesday is coming, I know. What happens Tuesday? A review can happen without final approval. But if they are trying to move quickly, they may try to get your signature before or during that process. Margaret closed her eyes. So they still need me? Yes. For the first time in days, that answer did not make her feel helpless. It gave shape to the power Daniel and Lauren were trying so hard to hide. They still needed her. At breakfast, Daniel was already gone. Lauren sat at the kitchen island in a crisp blouse, scrolling through her phone. A mug of coffee sat untouched beside her. You're up early, Lauren said. So are you. Lauren smiled faintly. Busy day. We're having people over tonight. Margaret stopped near the cabinet. People? Just a small dinner. Daniel's cousin Bethany and her husband and 2 friends from the neighborhood. Adults only, thank goodness. Quiet evening. Margaret opened the cabinet and took down a cup. I didn't know. I mentioned it to Daniel, not to you. The omission was deliberate, and Margaret felt it. Lauren continued, it shouldn't be much trouble. I already planned the menu. You can join us if you're feeling steady. Steady. The word was chosen like a pin tucked inside fabric. I'm steady enough, Margaret said. Lauren's eyes lifted from her phone. Good. Although I do think it might be better if we keep the financial tension away from the table tonight. Daniel has been under enormous stress, and guests don't need to be pulled into private family issues. Margaret poured hot water over her tea bag. I had no intention of discussing finances with your guests. Wonderful. Lauren stood and reached for her purse. Also, I moved your cane from the entryway. It didn't really fit the look of the room with company coming. Margaret turned. Where is it? In the coat closet. Margaret stared at her. The cane was not decoration. It was not clutter. It was support for a woman still recovering from surgery. You moved something I need because it didn't fit the room? Lauren's smile flickered. Margaret, it was 3 feet away. That is not the point. Lauren sighed, already tired of the conversation. Please don't make tonight difficult. Margaret walked to the coat closet herself and retrieved the cane. Then she leaned it against the kitchen chair where she could reach it. I'll decide where I keep what helps me walk. Lauren's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. The small boundary stayed in the room after she left. By late afternoon, Margaret had dressed carefully, not formally, not to impress Lauren. She wore navy slacks, a cream sweater, and the pearl earrings Arthur had given her on their 30th anniversary. She looked at herself in the mirror for longer than usual. There were lines around her mouth, her hair was thinner, her posture was not as straight as it had been before surgery, but her eyes were clear. She placed her phone in her pocket, fully charged. She had checked Ohio's recording laws earlier after Charles advised caution. She would not secretly record conversations without understanding the rules, but she could take notes afterward. She could save texts. She could photograph documents. She could remember exact words. And tonight she intended to listen. The guests arrived just after 6:30. Bethany, Daniel's adult cousin, came with her husband Mark. The neighborhood friends were Paul and Denise, a polished couple Lauren clearly wanted to impress. Everyone greeted Margaret politely, though Lauren introduced her in a way that made Margaret's spine stiffen. This is Daniel's mother, Margaret, Lauren said. She's staying with us while she gets back on her feet. Bethany smiled warmly. It's good to see you, Aunt Margaret. Aunt. The word carried history and affection. Margaret held on to it for one quiet second. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Lauren served roasted chicken, asparagus, and wild rice. The table looked elegant. White candles, cloth napkins, wine glasses Daniel kept refilling a little too quickly. Margaret was seated near the far end, beside Mark, away from Daniel and Lauren. The placement was not accidental. From there, she could hear most of the conversation, but was not expected to lead any of it. Halfway through dinner, Paul began talking about aging parents. His father had recently moved into assisted living, and he described the process with the tired humor people used when they wanted sympathy without sounding cruel. It's a lot, Paul said. Bills, appointments, paperwork. Honestly, nobody warns you that your parents become another full-time job. A few people chuckled. Daniel gave a weak laugh. Margaret looked down at her plate. Lauren's gaze flicked toward her, then back to Paul. That's exactly what Tycoop's telling Daniel. People don't understand the administrative load until they're living it. Bethany's smile faded slightly. I'm sure Margaret handles plenty herself. Lauren tilted her head. She tries. But after surgery and after selling her house, some things became complicated. Margaret felt every word. Selling her house. Surgery. Complicated. Lauren had built a neat little frame and placed Margaret inside it for public viewing. Daniel cut into his chicken and said nothing. Denise leaned toward Margaret kindly. It must be nice to have family helping. Margaret looked at Daniel before answering. He would not meet her eyes. It is nice, she said softly, when help remains respectful. The table quieted for half a second. Lauren laughed lightly. Margaret has always had a very independent streak. Bethany spoke before anyone else could. That's not a bad thing. No one said it was. Lauren took a sip of wine. But independence can be tricky when someone else is providing the roof, the meals, the transportation, and all the quiet support behind the scenes. Margaret felt the sentence land exactly where Lauren intended. Her hand tightened around her fork. Daniel finally looked up. Lauren. What? Lauren smiled at him. I'm only saying family care is more complicated than people realize. Bethany set her glass down. Maybe this isn't dinner conversation. Lauren's face remained pleasant, but her voice cooled. You're right. I just think caregivers are often invisible. Caregivers. Margaret nearly laughed, but there was no humor in her. Lauren had moved her cane out of sight that morning. Daniel had initiated a trust transfer behind her back. Her records were missing. Money had already been used for residential debt. And now Lauren sat beneath warm dining room light, describing herself and Daniel as invisible caregivers. The reversal was so bold it almost took Margaret's breath. After dessert, the guests moved to the living room. Bethany lingered near Margaret as the others talked. Are you okay? She asked quietly. The question was simple. It was also the first direct concern anyone had offered Margaret in days. Margaret looked at her. I'm managing. Bethany studied her face. That isn't the same thing. Before Margaret could answer, Lauren called from across the room. Bethany, Daniel wanted to show Mark the patio renovation plans. Bethany hesitated, then squeezed Margaret's hand once before walking away. Margaret watched the group gather around Daniel's tablet. Renovation plans. Another expense. Another piece of the house that apparently needed improving. While Daniel was quietly using trust money to service debt. She excused herself and went to the hallway bathroom. Inside, she closed the door and took out her phone. She typed notes quickly while the words were fresh. Lauren introduced me as staying until I get back on my feet. Said Daniel provides roof, meals, transportation, support. Called herself caregiver. Daniel did not correct her. Guests present. Bethany, Mark, Paul, Denise. She saved the note and emailed it to herself. When she stepped back into the hall, Daniel was waiting. His face was tense. Mom, he said quietly, can you not do this tonight? Do what? Make Lauren look bad in front of people. Margaret stared at him. I made Lauren look bad. You know what I mean? No, she said. I don't think I do. Daniel lowered his voice. She's trying. You've been cold since you met with Charles. Margaret felt something inside her grow still. Daniel, money from the trust already paid something tied to your house. His face went pale. For 1 second there was no husband, no host, no man pretending control. Only her son caught. Then the mask returned. This is not the place, he said. No, it never is. Lauren's voice floated from the living room, bright and performative. Daniel, we're waiting. Daniel stepped closer. Please don't embarrass me. Margaret looked at him with a sadness so deep it almost felt calm. You should have thought about embarrassment before you let your wife call me a burden in my own family. His jaw tightened. She didn't say that. She said enough. He looked away. The guests left around 9. Bethany hugged Margaret at the door and whispered, Call me if you need anything. Margaret nodded but said nothing more. She did not want to pull Bethany into something she did not yet understand herself. When the door closed, Lauren turned immediately. That was humiliating, she said. Margaret leaned on her cane. For whom? Lauren's eyes flashed. You sat there acting wounded while I hosted dinner in my own home. Daniel stood behind her, silent again. Margaret looked from Lauren to Daniel. She felt tired in her body, but not in her spirit. I am wounded, she said. That is not acting. Lauren crossed her arms. Then maybe we need to reconsider whether this living arrangement is still healthy. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Lauren. No, Daniel. We can't keep walking on eggshells in our own house. Margaret absorbed the words carefully. There it was. Not a direct eviction, not yet, but the shape of one. She nodded once. then perhaps we should all think about what comes next. She turned and walked upstairs slowly, every step deliberate. In her room, she locked the door, opened her notebook, and wrote Lauren's words exactly. Reconsider whether this living arrangement is still healthy. Then her phone buzzed, a text from Bethany. Aunt Margaret, I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, but Daniel asked me last month whether I knew a doctor who could evaluate an older relative's decision-making capacity. Was he talking about you? Margaret read Bethany's text 3 times before she moved. Aunt Margaret, I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, but Daniel asked me last month whether I knew a doctor who could evaluate an older relative's decision-making capacity. Was he talking about you? The room seemed to become smaller around her, not because the question was unexpected anymore, but because it came from outside the house, outside Lauren's careful explanations, outside Daniel's soft denials. Bethany had no reason to invent it, no reason to misunderstand the shape of the question. Decision-making capacity. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her cane leaning against the nightstand, her notebook open on her lap. She saved a screenshot of Bethany's text, then forwarded it to her old email account and to Charles. Only after the message sent did she allow herself to answer, "When did he ask you?" Bethany replied almost immediately. "About 4 weeks ago. He said he was worried after your surgery and wanted to be prepared if you became unable to handle paperwork. I thought it sounded odd, but he made it seem hypothetical." Margaret stared at the word hypothetical. People used that word when they wanted distance from an intention. She typed slowly. "Did he mention Lauren?" A pause. Then Bethany answered. "He said Lauren thought it might be smart to have documentation before things got complicated." Margaret closed her eyes. The line between concern and strategy had vanished completely. Before things got complicated. No. Before Margaret began asking questions. Her phone rang less than 5 minutes later. Charles. "I saw the text," he said. Margaret looked toward the locked bedroom door. Bethany confirmed it. "Daniel asked about capacity evaluation. I need you to preserve those messages." "I did. Good. Do not delete anything." "Do not confront him about that yet." Margaret let out a slow breath. "Charles, were they trying to make me look incompetent? I can't say that conclusively. But combined with the household agreement, missing records, intercepted mail, and trust transfer, it becomes a concerning pattern. A pattern, not one misunderstanding, not one awkward dinner, not one overbearing daughter-in-law. A pattern," Charles continued. "I'm going to request the full trust file and recent bank correspondence on an expedited basis. I also want you to schedule a follow-up with your own physician if possible. Not because I believe there is a problem, but because an independent note showing you are managing your affairs can be useful if anyone tries to suggest otherwise." Margaret felt a strange mix of humiliation and relief. Humiliation that she had to prove she could think. Relief that there was something practical to do. "I can call Dr. Reeves tomorrow," she said. "Good. And Mrs. Hale, if the atmosphere in the house worsens, you need somewhere safe to go." I packed a bag. Charles was silent for a moment. "I'm glad." After the call, Margaret placed the phone on the bed and looked around the guest room. It had never felt more temporary. The floral curtains, the beige comforter, the framed print Lauren had chosen. Even the chair beneath the window looked as if it were waiting for someone else. Margaret stood slowly and moved to the closet. She checked the overnight bag again. Medication, copies, clothes, charger, identification, locking pouch. Then she added the pearl earrings Arthur had given her and the small framed photograph from her dresser. Not a large one, just enough to remind her she had once belonged somewhere without needing permission. Downstairs, voices rose. Daniel and Lauren were arguing again. Margaret stepped closer to the door but did not open it. Lauren's voice came clear through the hallway vent. "Bethany was watching us all night." Daniel sounded irritated. "Bethany always watches everything. She pulled your mother aside. So maybe she knows something." "About what?" The doctor questioned Daniel. Margaret's body went still. Daniel said nothing. Lauren lowered her voice, but not enough. "I told you not to ask family. You should have gone directly through the clinic." Daniel's reply came sharper. "I wasn't going to make a formal request behind my mother's back." Lauren laughed once. "But you'll move trust assets behind her back?" The silence after that was so complete Margaret could hear her own breathing. Then Daniel said, "That's different." "No, it isn't. It's worse if you don't finish it." Margaret stepped away from the door. Her chest hurt, but not with surprise. The surprise had ended. What remained was grief sharpened by clarity. The next morning, she called Dr. Reeves's office from her locked room. His receptionist offered an appointment the following week, but Margaret asked if there had been any recent inquiries about her records. The receptionist became cautious, as she should have. "I can't discuss details over the phone beyond your own account, Mrs. Hale," she said. "I understand. I'm asking whether anyone requested information using my name." There was a pause. "I see a note that a family member called asking about documentation for post-surgical cognitive concerns," the receptionist said carefully. "No records were released. We told them you would need to contact us directly." Margaret gripped the phone tighter. "Which family member?" "I'm sorry, I can't confirm that over the phone without further verification. I'll come in. We can print your contact log if you sign a release in person." Margaret thanked her and ended the call. Another piece, still incomplete, still dangerous. She opened her notebook. June 7, Dr. Reeves's office confirmed a family member called asking about documentation for post-surgical cognitive concerns. No records released. Must request contact log in person. She took a photo of the entry. Then she made a decision. She would not wait for Daniel or Lauren to decide when she could leave the house. She scheduled a rideshare to Dr. Reeves's office for later that morning. She also texted Bethany. "Thank you for telling me. Please save your messages. I may need you to confirm this later," Bethany replied. "I will. Are you safe there?" Margaret read the question and felt something inside her loosen. Someone had asked the right question. "For now," she typed. At 11, Margaret walked downstairs with her purse and cane. Daniel was in the kitchen, working from home at the island. Lauren stood beside him, reading something on her tablet. Both looked up when Margaret entered. "I have an appointment," Margaret said. Daniel closed his laptop halfway. "What appointment?" "Medical." Lauren's eyes narrowed. "You didn't mention that. I'm mentioning it now." Daniel stood. "I'll drive you." "No, thank you, Mom. I arranged transportation." Lauren set down the tablet. "Why would you do that? It makes no sense for you to ride with a stranger when Daniel is right here." Margaret looked at Daniel. "Because I don't want to discuss where I'm going before I go." Daniel's face tightened with hurt. This time, Margaret did not rush to soften it. "That sounds paranoid," Lauren said quietly. Margaret turned to her. "No, it sounds private." The doorbell rang. Her ride had arrived. Daniel followed her to the entry. "Mom, please stop treating me like an enemy." She paused with her hand on the knob. "Then stop hiding things from me." He did not answer. That was becoming his answer. At Dr. Reeves's office, Margaret signed the release form and requested a copy of the contact note. It was brief but enough. Caller identified himself as patient's son, requested information regarding possible cognitive decline following surgery, asked whether physician could provide written recommendation for assisted financial management. No disclosure made. Patient must initiate evaluation. Margaret read it twice in the waiting room. Assisted financial management. There it was, clean and clinical, hiding the ugly shape of what Daniel and Lauren had been circling. She asked the receptionist to scan a copy to her email and place the original in a sealed envelope. Then she scheduled her own appointment for the following week, making sure the note reflected that she requested it independently. On the way back, she did not return straight to Daniel's house. She had the driver take her to the P.O. Box location. Inside the small lobby, she mailed copies of the doctor's office note to Charles. Then she placed one copy inside the box itself, sealed in a folder, a safe place, small, metal, ordinary, but hers. When she returned, Lauren opened the door before Margaret could use her key. The key. Margaret noticed immediately. Her spare house key was no longer on the hook beside the door. It had hung there since she moved in, with a little blue tag Lauren had written her name on. Now the hook was empty. "Where is my key?" Margaret asked. Lauren's expression did not change. "Daniel thought it would be safer if we kept track of all house keys for now." Margaret looked past her into the hallway. Daniel stood near the kitchen, watching. "For now," Margaret said. Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, with everything going on, we just don't want keys misplaced." "I didn't misplace it. No one said you did. You removed my access to the house while I was at a doctor's office." Lauren folded her arms. "You still live here. We're standing right here." Margaret looked at her son. "Give me the key." Daniel hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than refusal. "Mom, let's talk first." "No, give me the key." Lauren's voice sharpened. "This is our home, Margaret." The words landed exactly where intended. "Our home. Not yours. Not even temporarily yours." Margaret felt the final illusion weaken. Daniel reached into a drawer, took out the key, and held it for a moment before placing it in her palm. His hand brushed hers. He did not look at her. She closed her fingers around the key. "Thank you," she said. Then she went upstairs. Only when the bedroom door was locked did she open the sealed doctor's note again and photograph every line. She sent it to Charles with the subject, "They tried the clinic." His reply came 20 minutes later. "This is important. Keep the original safe. I am contacting the bank before Tuesday. Margaret read the message twice. Then another email arrived from Charles, sent separately. Bank confirmed final authorization packet is being prepared. It may be delivered to Daniel's address within 48 hours. Do not sign. Do not let them isolate you when it arrives. Margaret did not move after reading Charles's email. The room around her felt too quiet, too neatly arranged, too false. A final authorization packet was being prepared. It might arrive within 48 hours. Daniel and Lauren would know that too. They were not waiting for truth anymore. They were waiting for paper. She read the last line again. Do not let them isolate you when it arrives. That sentence stayed with her. Isolation had not happened all at once. It had come in pieces. Lauren taking over meals, Daniel sorting mail, the missing document box, the removed house key, the warnings about stress, confusion, and complicated paperwork. Each piece had looked small enough to excuse until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Margaret opened her overnight bag and added the sealed doctor's office note. Then she took the key Daniel had finally returned and slipped it into the zippered pocket of her purse. She no longer trusted hooks, counters, drawers, or polite explanations. The next morning, Daniel left early without knocking on her door. Lauren did not call her for breakfast. That was new. Usually, Lauren wanted control through care, through oatmeal, medication reminders, and questions asked with too much sweetness. Silence from Lauren felt more deliberate than attention. Margaret went downstairs at 9. The kitchen was empty, spotless, and cold. A sticky note sat beside the coffee maker. Daniel and I have appointments this morning. Please rest. We'll discuss everything tonight. There was no signature. Margaret photographed the note and made her own coffee. Then she went to the front window and watched the street. Daniel's car was gone. Lauren's car was gone. For the first time in days, she was alone in the house. She did not waste it. She went straight to the garage and searched again for her missing document box. She moved slowly, careful with her knee, checking behind storage bins and under folded patio chairs. The unlabeled tub with Daniel's financial files remained where she had found it, but she did not touch it this time. She had learned enough from those folder labels. More important now was what they had taken from her. 20 minutes later, she found something, not the box. A cardboard sleeve tucked behind the old holiday wreaths. Inside were several folders from Cleveland, removed from the missing box and separated from the rest. Margaret recognized her own handwriting on the tabs. House sale, Arthur Estate, bank statements 2021-2023. Her breath caught. They had not simply moved the box. Someone had opened it, sorted it, chosen what mattered. She took photos of the folders in place before touching them. Then she slid them out carefully and carried them upstairs in a laundry basket beneath folded towels. The little deception saddened her. It also kept her safe. In her room, she locked the door and spread the folders across the bed. Some papers were missing. She could tell immediately. The house sale folder was thinner than it should have been. The Arthur Estate folder still contained death certificates and probate correspondence, but not the full trust summary she vaguely remembered seeing after the funeral. The bank statement folder contained old monthly statements, but the last 6 months were absent. Still, it was something. She photographed everything. Every page, every tab, every empty pocket where papers had been removed. Then she placed the originals into the locking pouch and tucked it inside her overnight bag. At 11:30, Charles called. "I found part of my missing box," Margaret said before he could speak. "Where?" "In the garage, hidden behind decorations. Some folders were removed and kept in a cardboard sleeve. Recent statements are missing." Charles exhaled slowly. "Photograph the location if you haven't already." "I did. Good. Bring those records to me if you can. Not today if it puts you at risk, but soon." "There's more," she said. "Daniel and Lauren left together this morning. They said they had appointments." "What kind?" "They didn't say." Charles was quiet for a moment. The bank confirmed the packet was sent by overnight courier. "Delivery may be today or tomorrow." Margaret looked toward the window. "Can Daniel sign for it?" "Possibly, depending on how it was addressed. But he cannot legally sign for your approval." "Still, possession of the packet matters. If he gets it first, he may control how and when you see it." The doorbell rang downstairs. Margaret froze. "Mrs. Hale?" Charles said. "Someone's at the door." "Do not open it if you are uncomfortable." She moved to the top of the stairs and looked down through the narrow window beside the door. A courier stood on the porch holding a flat envelope. Her mouth went dry. "It's here," she whispered. "Is the envelope addressed to you? I can't see. Take the phone with you." "Do not let anyone take it from you." Margaret descended the stairs carefully, one step at a time. The courier rang again. She opened the door with the chain still engaged. Delivery for Margaret Hale, he said. I'm Margaret Hale. I need a signature and ID. Relief nearly made her knees weaken. She closed the door, removed the chain, then opened it again. With Charles still on the phone in her hand, she showed her driver's license and signed on the courier's tablet. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. As soon as the door closed, she locked it. Then she carried the packet upstairs without opening it. I have it, she told Charles. Good. Photograph the sealed envelope before opening. She did. Front, back, label, tracking number, every corner. Only then did she slit it open with the small scissors from her sewing kit. Inside were several pages clipped together. Trust asset reallocation authorization, beneficiary acknowledgement, consent to administrative transfer, attached disclosure summary. Margaret placed the phone on speaker and set it beside the papers. Read the first paragraph, Charles said. She did, slowly. The words were dense, but she understood the core of it. The proposed transfer would consolidate certain trust-linked assets into a managed account structure. Daniel R. Hale would remain administrative trustee. Margaret Elaine Hale, as primary beneficiary, would acknowledge, review, and consent. Does it list the amount? Charles asked. Margaret turned the page. Yes, she said the number aloud. Charles was silent. It was the first time she had heard him lose his careful rhythm. That is well beyond Daniel's discretionary authority, he said. Margaret sat down. The room tilted slightly, though nothing moved. The amount represented more than a repair, more than a temporary loan, more than a helping family through a hard month. It was a major shift, a change that would alter the structure Arthur had left behind. Do not sign, Charles said. I won't. I'm sending a formal notice to the bank that you are represented by counsel and that no authorization is valid unless reviewed through my office. That does not stop them from asking for your signature, but it puts them on notice. Margaret looked at the signature page. Her printed name waited beneath a blank line. I understand. And Margaret? His use of her first name made her look up. If Daniel and Lauren return before I call back, put the packet somewhere safe. Do not let them pressure you into discussing it alone. She hung up only after Charles promised to call within the hour. Margaret scanned the pages with her phone. Then she placed the original packet inside the locking pouch with the doctor's note and the recovered folders. The pouch no longer fit neatly inside the overnight bag, so she removed a sweater and wrapped it around the pouch. At 2:15, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. Lauren's car followed. Margaret watched from the window. They got out together. Daniel looked tense. Lauren looked determined. In her hand was a folder Margaret had never seen before. The front door opened. Mom? Daniel called. Margaret placed the overnight bag inside the closet behind the suitcase and stepped into the hallway. I'm upstairs. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Lauren stood behind him, holding the folder against her chest. Did anything come today? Daniel asked. Margaret looked at her son. He tried to sound casual. He failed, yes. His eyes flickered. Lauren moved closer. From the bank? Yes. Daniel climbed 2 steps, then stopped. Okay, good. We should go through it together. I already reviewed it. Lauren's mouth tightened. Alone, with Charles on the phone. Daniel's face changed. Mom, why would you do that? Because my name is on it. Lauren stepped forward. Margaret, these documents are time-sensitive. You can't drag every routine form through a lawyer. It isn't routine. Daniel reached the landing. Where is it? Margaret did not answer. His voice lowered. Mom, where is the packet? In a safe place. Lauren laughed once, sharp and angry. This is ridiculous. Daniel held up a hand to quiet her, then looked at Margaret with the face he used when he wanted to seem patient. Mom, listen, that transfer is part of a larger financial plan. It protects everyone. Where are the funds going? To a managed account. Managed by whom? He hesitated. Lauren answered for him. By Daniel, under the existing structure. Margaret turned to her. That isn't what the disclosure says. For the first time, Lauren blinked. Margaret continued. The disclosure says the structure changes administrative authority. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't understand the difference. Then explain it. Not in the hallway. I'm listening. Lauren stepped past Daniel. Margaret, stop making this combative. You live here. Daniel feeds you, drives you, handles your appointments, and keeps this household stable while you question every good thing he tries to do. Margaret looked at Daniel. Is that how you see it? He did not answer fast enough. Lauren did. It's the truth. Margaret felt something settle inside her. Painful, yes, but clear. No, she said. The truth is that you need my signature. Daniel flinched. Lauren's eyes hardened. And if you refuse to help your own family, then maybe we need to revisit whether this arrangement can continue. There it was again, but sharper now. Housing as pressure, shelter as leverage. Margaret held the railing and kept her voice steady. I will not sign a financial document to keep a bedroom. Daniel looked wounded. That's not what this is. Then stop letting it sound that way. The three of them stood in silence until Lauren finally opened the folder she had brought in. Fine, she said. If we're discussing documents, we can discuss this too. She pulled out a page and held it toward Margaret. Margaret did not take it. Daniel looked at Lauren sharply. Not now. Lauren ignored him. It's a statement from Daniel and me, she said, documenting your dependence in this household and our concerns about your judgment. Margaret stared at the paper. At the bottom, beneath a paragraph she had not yet read, were two signature lines. One already bore Daniel's name. Margaret stared at Daniel's signature until the shape of it stopped looking familiar. It was unmistakably his. The same slanted D, the same sharp break in the H of Hale. She had seen that signature on birthday cards, hospital forms, house sale papers, and checks he had written across her kitchen table years before. Now it sat at the bottom of a statement questioning her judgment. For a moment, no one spoke. Lauren held the document like it was proof of something. Daniel stood beside her, pale and silent, looking at the page as if he wished his name would disappear from it. Margaret did not reach for it. What is that? She asked. Lauren lifted her chin, a statement of concern. About me, about your decision-making. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, it wasn't meant to be used this way. Margaret looked at him. Then how was it meant to be used? He opened his mouth, but Lauren answered first. It was meant to protect the household. You have become increasingly suspicious, secretive, and emotionally reactive. Daniel and I documented our concerns in case a professional needed context. A professional, Margaret repeated. Like the Dr. Bethany told me you asked about? Daniel's face changed again. Lauren went still. Bethany told you? Margaret looked directly at her son. You asked your cousin whether she knew a doctor who could evaluate an older relative's capacity. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I was asking hypothetically. No, Daniel, Margaret said quietly. You were building a file. His eyes lifted, wounded, and defensive at once. That's not fair. Neither is signing a document about my judgment while asking me to sign away control of trust assets. Lauren stepped forward, the paper still in her hand. You keep saying sign away control like someone is stealing from you. Then let Charles review it with us. No, Lauren said quickly. The answer came too fast. Daniel turned toward her. Lauren, she ignored him. We are not turning this into a legal circus every time your mother refuses to understand something. Margaret took one step down from the landing, leaning on her cane. Her voice stayed calm because anger would give Lauren exactly what she wanted. I understand enough to know I'm not signing anything tonight. Lauren's mouth tightened. Then you are choosing to hurt this family. No, Margaret said. I am choosing not to hurt myself. Daniel looked down. That hurt most. Not Lauren's accusation, not the paper. Daniel's silence. Every time truth came close to him, he retreated into shame and left his wife to speak cruelty on his behalf. Margaret held out her hand. Give me a copy. Lauren laughed under her breath. Absolutely not. If it concerns me, I want a copy. It isn't yours. Margaret looked at Daniel. Do you agree with that? He hesitated. Lauren turned sharply. Daniel. He swallowed. Mom, we can talk about it tomorrow. Margaret lowered her hand. So the answer is yes. Daniel's face tightened. That isn't what I said. It is what you allowed. She turned and walked back toward her room, each step careful and slow. She knew they were watching her. She also knew they expected her to be shaken enough to make a mistake. Instead, she locked the bedroom door behind her and sat at the desk. Her hands trembled only after she was alone. She opened her notebook and wrote everything. The title Lauren had spoken. Statement of concern, Daniel's signature. Lauren refused copy. Daniel did not object. Lauren said Margaret was choosing to hurt the family. Margaret refused to sign transfer. Then she wrote Bethany's name beside the note about the doctor question and circled it once. Evidence no longer lived in one place. It was spreading. Texts, bank records, medical office notes. Her own dated observations, recovered folder, courier photos, the packet. The pattern had become too large for Daniel to explain away with stress. Her phone buzzed. Charles, she answered quietly. Are you alone? He asked. Yes. I received your last message. What happened? Margaret told him everything. The hallway, Lauren's folder, Daniel's signature, the statement about her judgment, the refusal to give her a copy. Charles stayed silent until she finished. That document matters, he said. I don't have it. Did you see the title? Yes. Lauren called it a statement of concern. Did Daniel sign it? Yes. Did it include your name? I saw my name in the first paragraph, but I didn't read the full page. That is enough for now. Document exactly what you remember. If they attempt to use it, we can challenge it. But I want you to avoid being alone with them when the signature issue comes up again. Margaret looked toward the door. That may be difficult. then create another person in the room. Who? Me. Speakerphone. If they present the transfer packet again, call me before answering. If they refuse, say you will not continue the conversation. Margaret absorbed that, a boundary with a witness. Not a fight, not a scene, a procedure. What about the bank? I sent notice this afternoon, Charles said. They acknowledged receipt but have not stopped the scheduled review yet. They asked whether you deny approval. I do. Then tomorrow we make that formal. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Will that stop, Daniel? It stops one path, not all pressure. She understood. After the call, Margaret moved the overnight bag closer to the bed. She slept in pieces, waking at every sound. Once, near midnight, she heard footsteps pause outside her door. The floor creaked. Someone stood there for several seconds. Then the footsteps moved away. In the morning, Lauren did not knock. She texted, breakfast downstairs. We need to settle this before noon. Margaret took a screenshot before replying. I will come down after I speak with Charles. Lauren answered almost instantly. This is exactly what we mean. You are making family communication impossible. Margaret did not reply. At 9:30, Charles called and reviewed what she needed to say to the bank. Not emotional language, clear language. She did not approve the transfer. She wanted all future correspondence sent to her P.O. box and copied to counsel. She wanted no document processed based on Daniel's statements about her consent. By 10:15, Margaret called the bank with Charles listening on another line. Denise Caldwell answered after verification. Margaret read the tape. Charles had helped her prepare. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. I do not approve the pending trust asset reallocation. I have not signed any authorization. I request that no transfer proceed without direct written confirmation from me after review by my attorney. Denise's tone became formal. I understand, Mrs. Hale. I will note the account and escalate this to our trust review department. Please confirm that in writing. Yes. We can send confirmation to your updated mailing preference and secure email. When the call ended, Margaret felt tired in a way that reached the bones. But beneath the exhaustion was something else. A line had been drawn. Downstairs, Daniel and Lauren were waiting. The kitchen table had been cleared except for the transfer packet. Somehow they had found it. Margaret stopped in the doorway. The locking pouch was not visible. Her bedroom door had still been locked when she left. But the original packet, the one she had hidden in the pouch, now sat on the table inside its opened envelope. Her stomach dropped. Lauren sat with her hands folded. Daniel stood near the counter, unable to meet her eyes. Where did you get that? Margaret asked. Daniel looked miserable. Mom, where? Lauren answered coolly. You left it in your room. My room was locked. Daniel flinched. Lauren's expression did not change. This is our house. We have spare keys. For several seconds, Margaret could not speak. It was not only the packet, it was the violation, the search, the decision that a locked door inside their home did not count if she was the one behind it. She looked at Daniel. You unlocked my door? He whispered. Lauren thought, no, Margaret said. Did you unlock my door? He swallowed. Yes, there it was. A confession too small for court, too large for the heart. Margaret pulled out her phone and tapped Charles's contact. Lauren leaned forward. Do not call him. Margaret pressed the button. Put it down, Lauren snapped. Daniel stepped toward her. Mom, please, just listen first. Margaret raised the phone to her ear. Charles answered on the second ring. Margaret? She turned on speaker and placed the phone on the table. Charles, she said, her eyes on Daniel. Daniel just admitted he unlocked my bedroom door and removed the bank packet from my things. Lauren's face went white with anger. Charles's voice came through the speaker, calm and hard. Daniel, Lauren, this conversation is now witnessed. Margaret, do not answer any questions until I ask you one directly. Daniel stared at the phone. Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Charles continued, Margaret, do you approve the trust asset reallocation packet currently in that room? Margaret looked at the signature line waiting on the table. No, she said. The word was quiet. It was also final. Daniel closed his eyes. Then Charles said, good. Then the next step is protective action under the trust. The kitchen went completely still after Charles spoke. Protective action under the trust. The words did not sound dramatic, but their effect was immediate. Daniel looked as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Lauren's anger sharpened into something colder, more alert. Margaret stood by the table with one hand resting on the back of a chair, her phone lying between them on speaker, and for the first time since moving into that house, she did not feel outnumbered. Lauren recovered first. This is absurd, she said. Charles, with all due respect, you are hearing one side of a family dispute. Charles's voice remained calm. Mrs. Hale's bedroom was unlocked without her consent, and a bank authorization packet addressed to her was removed from her belongings. That is not merely a family dispute. Daniel flinched at the word belongings. Margaret noticed. A day earlier, she might have felt guilty for seeing him ashamed. Now she only felt tired. "Mom," Daniel said softly, "I didn't take it to hurt you." Margaret looked at him. "Why did you take it?" He rubbed his forehead. "Because we needed to talk." "No," Charles said through the phone. "You needed access to a document Margaret had already secured." Daniel's face tightened. "Charles, this is between me and my mother. It became my concern when trust assets and beneficiary consent were involved." Lauren stepped closer to the table. "You're making this sound criminal." "I am making it sound serious," Charles replied. "Because it is." Margaret looked down at the unsigned packet. The signature line still waited there, blank and patient, as if none of this pain mattered until ink touched paper. "Charles," she said, "what does protective action mean?" Daniel's eyes lifted quickly. "It means you may invoke the protection clauses Arthur included in the trust," Charles said, temporarily suspending Daniel's administrative authority while the bank and my office review recent activity. Lauren laughed, but it came out too sharp. "You can't just suspend him because Margaret is upset." Charles answered without pause. "The clause allows the primary beneficiary to request protective review if she reasonably believes trust activity may have been misused or conducted under pressure." Margaret held Daniel's gaze. "And can I do that now?" "Yes," Charles said, "if that is your decision." Daniel took a step toward her. "Mom, please don't." The plea struck her harder than his anger would have. She heard the old rhythm in it, the son who still knew exactly where her heart was soft. But softness had been used too many times to move her out of her own way. "Daniel," she said quietly, "did you initiate the transfer?" He looked down. "Yes." "Did you tell me before you did it?" "No." "Did money from the trust already go toward your house debt?" His face went pale. Lauren cut in. That withdrawal was permitted. Margaret turned to her. "I asked Daniel." Daniel swallowed. "Yes." The answer settled into the kitchen with a weight no one could lift. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. She did not see numbers. She saw groceries, oatmeal, moved canes, hidden mail, Lauren saying everyone was carrying so much. She saw Daniel laughing weakly at dinner while another man joked about aging parents becoming a job. She saw her own key missing from the hook. When she opened her eyes, her voice was steady. "Charles, I want the protective review." Daniel's shoulders dropped. Lauren stared at Margaret as if she had slapped her. "Margaret," she said, low and furious, "you have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm not doing," Margaret said. "I'm not signing." Charles spoke again. "Margaret, I will prepare the notice immediately. I need you to confirm on record that you are requesting temporary suspension of Daniel R. Hale's administrative authority pending review of trust transactions and beneficiary consent procedures." Daniel's face twisted. "On record?" "This call is not being treated as a secret," Charles said. "It is being treated as notice." Margaret looked at her son. She wanted him to say something honest, not defensive, not strategic, just honest. Instead, he stared at the table. "I confirm," she said. Lauren made a sound of disbelief. "You're choosing a lawyer over your son." Margaret picked up the phone. "No, I'm choosing the truth over pressure." She ended the call only after Charles told her he would contact the bank and email written confirmation within the hour. For several seconds after the line went dead, no one moved. Then Lauren snatched the statement of concern from the table and shoved it back into her folder. "Well," she said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." Daniel closed his eyes. "Lauren, stop." "No, Daniel, she just froze your access to the trust." "Temporarily," Margaret said. Lauren turned on her. "Do you even hear yourself? You're sitting in our home, eating our food, using our space, and now you're attacking us legally." The words came fast, but this time Margaret did not absorb them. She watched them. There was a difference. "I paid for my own groceries before I came here," Margaret said. "I drove myself before surgery. I managed my own home before Daniel helped me sell it. Do not mistake a recovery period for a surrender." Lauren's face flushed. Daniel sank into a chair. "Mom, we were trying to stabilize things." "What things?" He did not answer. "What things, Daniel?" Lauren snapped. "The house, obviously. The mortgage. The debt. The timing. All the things your son has been too embarrassed to tell you." Daniel looked at her sharply. "Lauren." Margaret felt a cold clarity move through her. "What debt?" Lauren seemed to realize she had said too much, but pride kept her from retreating. Daniel stood. "Not now." "Yes," Margaret said, "now." He shook his head. "No, not like this." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then I'll learn it from the records." Daniel's face hardened. "You're going to destroy everything." "No," she said. "I'm going to find out what everything is." She took the bank packet from the table and placed it back inside the envelope. Lauren stepped forward as if to stop her, then seemed to remember Charles and the bank and the words protective review. For once, Lauren did not reach. Margaret carried the packet upstairs with her phone in one hand and her cane in the other. Her bedroom door no longer felt like protection, but she locked it anyway. Then she pushed the chair beneath the knob again. She photographed the packet on the desk, wrote the time Daniel admitted unlocking her door, and added the exact words Lauren had used: mortgage, debt, timing. Her inbox refreshed while she was writing. Charles had sent a scanned copy of the protective notice. It was formal, precise, and addressed to the Trust Review Department. Daniel R. Hale's administrative authority was to be suspended pending review. No transfer, withdrawal, reallocation, or beneficiary consent process was to proceed without direct communication with Margaret and counsel. Margaret read it twice, then she cried, quietly, not because she regretted it, because no mother wanted to sign a document that protected her from her own son. By evening, the house had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. No one called her down for dinner. She heard cabinet doors, muted voices, Lauren walking hard across the kitchen floor. Around 7, Daniel knocked. Mom. Margaret sat on the bed. Yes. Can I come in? A pause. I'm not going to take anything. She closed her eyes. That should never have needed saying. Silence. Then Daniel said, I'm sorry. Margaret wanted those words to matter more, but they floated outside the locked door, too small for what had happened. What are you sorry for? She asked. He did not answer right away. For unlocking the door, he said at last. Only that, not the transfer, not the withdrawal, not the missing records, not the document questioning her mind. Margaret opened her notebook. That's a start, she said, his voice lowered. Lauren thinks you should stay somewhere else for a few days. There it was. Not a request, not yet an eviction, but close enough to show its teeth. Margaret looked at her packed overnight bag. Do you think that too? She asked. Daniel's silence stretched too long. Finally, he said, I think things are too tense here. Margaret wrote the sentence down exactly. Things are too tense here. Then she stood and opened the door. Daniel looked exhausted. His eyes moved to the overnight bag behind her chair, and something like guilt passed across his face. Margaret met his gaze. I will decide where I sleep tonight, she said. Not Lauren. Mom, and tomorrow, she continued, I'm going to Charles's office with every document I still have. Daniel looked afraid now, truly afraid. Before he could answer, Lauren appeared at the end of the hallway, phone in hand. Daniel, she said tightly, the bank just emailed. Margaret turned. Lauren's voice was flat with disbelief. They froze the transfer review. Lauren stood at the end of the hallway with her phone still in her hand, staring at the screen as if rereading the message might change it. They froze the transfer review, she said again. Daniel did not move. His face had gone gray in a way Margaret had never seen before. Not angry, not offended, afraid. The fear told her more than the email did. Whatever Daniel and Lauren had been counting on, the bank's freeze had not been a minor inconvenience. It had struck the center of their plan. Margaret kept one hand on her bedroom doorframe. The hallway felt narrow with all three of them standing there, but for once she did not feel trapped inside it. That's what happens when the primary beneficiary says no, she said. Lauren looked up sharply. You are enjoying this. No, you absolutely are. Margaret studied her daughter-in-law's face. The polished control was cracking. Beneath it was panic, and beneath panic was resentment so old it looked almost natural on her. I am not enjoying any part of this, Margaret said, but I am not going to apologize for protecting myself. Daniel turned toward Lauren. Let's go downstairs. Lauren ignored him. Do you know what you've done? Yes, Margaret said. I stopped a transfer I did not approve. You stopped a solution. A solution for whom? Daniel closed his eyes. Lauren, stop. No, Daniel, she needs to understand. This isn't some game where she gets to play helpless widow 1 minute and legal mastermind the next. There are real bills, real deadlines, real consequences. Margaret felt the words hit, but they no longer cut as deeply. Lauren was no longer hiding the pressure. She was naming it. What deadline? Margaret asked. Lauren's jaw tightened. Daniel opened his eyes. Not here. Margaret looked at him. You keep saying that because you keep trying to force conversations when emotions are high. My door was unlocked. My documents were taken. A statement about my judgment was signed, and now a bank transfer has been frozen. I think the conversation is already here. Daniel looked away. Lauren gave a cold smile. Fine. You want a conversation? Then let's have one. If this house becomes unstable because you refused to cooperate, you don't get to act shocked when your living arrangement changes. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Lauren. Margaret's hand tightened on the frame, but her voice stayed calm. Are you asking me to leave? Lauren did not blink. I'm saying this home cannot function under constant suspicion. This home, Margaret repeated. Daniel stepped between them slightly. No one is asking you to leave tonight. Margaret heard it clearly. So did Lauren, so did Daniel, judging by the way his face tightened immediately afterward. Margaret nodded once. Then I will make arrangements before someone decides for me. Daniel looked stricken. Mom, that's not what I meant. It is what you said. She stepped back into her room and closed the door before either of them could answer. This time she did not just lock it. She placed the chair beneath the knob, then dragged her overnight bag fully into view. The choice no longer felt dramatic, it felt practical. Her phone buzzed before she could sit down. Charles. Margaret, he said when she answered. The bank confirmed the freeze. Daniel's administrative authority is now under temporary review. No major trust activity can move forward until the internal review and my formal response are complete. Margaret sank into the chair. Lawrence just said there are real bills and deadlines. That may explain urgency, but not non-disclosure. She also implied my staying here may change. Do you need to leave tonight? Margaret looked at the overnight bag. Not yet. But I want to be ready. Good. I recommend you identify one place you can go immediately if needed. A hotel, a trusted relative, a short-term rental. Do not wait until an argument becomes an emergency. Margaret thought of Bethany. Then she thought of pulling another person into the middle of this. She did not want to do it, but pride was becoming a luxury she could not afford. I'll call Bethany, she said. Good. Also, I received something from Dr. Reeves's office after you authorized release. Margaret straightened. What? A contact log. It names Daniel as the caller who asked about decision-making capacity. There is a second note from 2 days later. A woman who identified herself as Margaret Hale called and asked whether a spouse could request documentation if an elderly parent was living in the household. Margaret closed her eyes. Lauren had gone further than Daniel. What did the office say? They declined to discuss without your authorization. But the note exists. Send me a copy. I already did. After the call, Margaret opened her email. The clinic log sat there as a scanned attachment. She read the second note slowly. Caller identified as Lauren Hale. Asked generally whether caregiver observations could support request for assisted financial management. Advised that patient must request evaluation directly or proper legal documentation must be provided. No records released. Caregiver observations. Margaret almost laughed, but it came out like a breath. Lauren had called herself a caregiver while moving a cane out of sight because it ruined the room. She had called herself a caregiver while hiding mail, drafting dependency language, and pushing a financial transfer that Margaret had not approved. Margaret forwarded the clinic log to her old email and saved it. Then she texted Bethany. Are you available to talk privately tonight? Bethany replied within minutes. Yes, I can call now. Margaret hesitated, then pressed the call button. Bethany answered softly. Aunt Margaret? I'm sorry to involve you. You're not involving me. Daniel did when he asked that question. The simple loyalty nearly broke Margaret's composure. Margaret told her only what she needed to know. The capacity inquiry, the missing records, the bank freeze, the possibility that she might need somewhere to stay for a short time. Bethany did not hesitate. Come here if you need to. I don't want to burden you. You are not a burden. Margaret looked toward the locked bedroom door. Those words, spoken plainly, landed deeper than Bethany probably knew. Thank you, Margaret said. After the call ended, she packed more carefully. Not everything, not even close, but enough. She added the recovered folders, the clinic log, her medication, the bank packet, and Arthur's photograph. The locking pouch went at the bottom of the bag beneath folded clothes. Downstairs, the argument had moved to the kitchen. Their voices rose and fell, muffled through walls and floorboards. Margaret did not open the door until she heard one sentence clearly. Lauren said, then we need another way to prove she's unstable. Margaret froze. Daniel's response came lower, harder to hear. Lauren spoke again. Don't look at me like that. She's the one turning this into a war. Margaret took out her phone. Her state allowed recording of conversations with the consent of one party in many situations, but Charles had warned her not to rely on recordings without legal review. Instead, she typed the exact words into a note with the time. 8:42 p.m., Lauren said. Then we need another way to prove she's unstable. She saved it, emailed it, and placed the phone face down on the desk. A few minutes later, someone knocked. Not Daniel. Lauren's knocks was sharper. Margaret, she called. We need to speak like adults. Margaret stood behind the door. Not tonight. You can't hide in there forever. I'm not hiding. I'm ending the conversation for tonight. Lauren's voice dropped. You think Charles can protect you from reality? He can't. Lawyers send letters. They don't pay mortgages. There it was again. The mortgage. The real wound beneath all the careful language. Margaret did not answer. Lauren waited, then said, fine, but don't be surprised when Daniel finally stops letting guilt control him. Her footsteps moved away. Margaret sat back down and wrote that too. The next morning came gray and humid. Margaret woke after very little sleep, dressed quietly, and called a rideshare before going downstairs. Her overnight bag stood beside her, zipped and ready. She was not leaving permanently yet. She told herself that. She was moving the evidence first. When she opened the bedroom door, Daniel stood in the hall. He looked at the bag. "Mom," he said, voice low, "where are you going?" "To Bethany's for the morning." His face tightened. "So now you're telling the family." "I'm protecting my documents. That isn't what I asked." "It is the answer." He looked down the hall toward the stairs, then back at her. "Lauren is scared." Margaret stared at him. "Lauren is trying to prove I'm unstable." Daniel's face changed. "She said that?" he asked. "You heard enough." He did not deny it. For a moment he looked as though he might finally say the sentence she needed. That Lauren had gone too far, that he had gone too far, that none of this should have happened. Instead, he said, "She's under pressure." Margaret felt the last thread of patience loosen. "So am I," she said. She moved past him. He did not stop her. At Bethany's house, Margaret placed the locking pouch in a small bedroom closet and sent Charles the address as an emergency contact location. Bethany made tea but did not pry. That restraint felt like kindness. Around noon, while Margaret sat at Bethany's kitchen table, her phone buzzed with a forwarded email from an unknown address. The sender line showed it had originally gone from Lauren to Daniel the night before. The subject read, "Next steps if she refuses." Margaret opened it. Her eyes moved down the screen until one sentence stopped her cold. "Once she's declared dependent, Daniel can fix everything before the bank deadline." Margaret stared at the forwarded email until Bethany's kitchen seemed to fade around her. "Once she's declared dependent, Daniel can fix everything before the bank deadline." The sentence was not vague. It was not emotional. It was not something Lauren could explain away as concern or stress. It placed the whole plan in one cold line. Declare Margaret dependent. Let Daniel fix everything. Beat the bank deadline. Bethany sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched. "Aunt Margaret," she said softly, "who sent that to you?" "I don't know." Margaret looked again at the forwarding address. It was unfamiliar, a plain string of numbers and letters. No name, no explanation. But the original email header showed Lauren's address and Daniel's. The timestamp was the night before, less than an hour after the bank froze the transfer review. She forwarded the email to Charles immediately. Then she took screenshots of every part of it. Sender, original sender, timestamp, subject line, full message. She saved them in 2 places before she allowed herself to read the rest. Lauren had written in short, sharp paragraphs. "If she refuses, the only remaining path is documentation. Daniel, you need to stop reacting emotionally. We need proof that her judgment is compromised by stress, medication, and confusion since surgery. Once she's declared dependent, Daniel can fix everything before the bank deadline. If we wait, we lose the house and everything we built." Margaret stopped at the last line. "We lose the house." Bethany leaned forward. "What house?" Margaret looked up slowly. "Daniel's." Bethany's expression changed. She knew enough now to understand what the words meant, and not enough to make them less frightening. "Are they in danger of foreclosure? I don't know." But even as Margaret said it, she realized she was no longer sure that was true. The folder labels in the garage. Home equity line, private lending, renovation financing, residential debt service. Lauren's repeated references to deadlines, Daniel's panic when the transfer froze. It was not just pressure, it was a financial cliff. Charles called within 10 minutes. "Margaret," he said, "I read the email. Is it enough? It is important, but we need to authenticate where it came from before relying on it formally. Do not reply to the unknown sender. Preserve the message exactly as received." "I already saved it." "Good." Bethany stood and moved quietly toward the kitchen sink, giving Margaret privacy without leaving the room. Charles continued, "I also have the expanded transaction summary from the bank. There were more withdrawals." Margaret closed her eyes. "How many?" "Several over the past 6 months. Not all large, but enough to establish a pattern. The coded purposes vary: residential debt service, temporary liquidity support, property-related obligation. One references tax escrow." Margaret's hand tightened around the phone. "Daniel told me nothing." "No. Were they allowed?" "Some may fall within his discretionary authority. That is part of the difficulty. The question is not only whether he had technical access, it is whether he used that access consistently with the trust's purpose and whether he concealed material information from you." Margaret understood the distinction, though it brought little comfort. Daniel had not simply stolen one obvious thing in one reckless moment. He had used permissions Arthur had trusted him with. That felt worse in a different way. Arthur had left room for Daniel to help. Daniel had turned that room into a doorway. "What bank deadline?" she asked. "I was about to ask you the same thing." "Lauren's email says if we wait, they lose the house." Charles was quiet for a moment. "Then the debt may be tied to the property more directly than we knew." Margaret looked at Bethany's calm kitchen, at the clean windows and the bowl of lemons on the counter. Ordinary things, safe things. She wondered when Daniel's home had stopped being a home and become collateral. "What should I do? Stay where you are for now. If you need to return to Daniel's house, do not go alone. I'm requesting property-related records connected to prior trust distributions, but that may take time. You may also want to search your recovered house sale folder for any reference to family loans, advances, or property assistance." Margaret glanced toward the hallway where Bethany had placed her bag. "I have the folder here. Good. Review it carefully. Call me if you see anything involving Daniel's home, down payment assistance, promissory notes, or trust advances." After the call, Margaret opened the recovered folder on Bethany's kitchen table. Bethany sat with her, but did not touch the documents. Margaret appreciated that more than she could say. Everyone else had handled her papers as if access were automatic. Bethany waited to be invited. The house sale folder mostly held closing statements from Margaret's Cleveland home. There were signatures, escrow amounts, tax adjustments, and wire confirmation pages. Nothing about Daniel. Then she opened the Arthur estate folder. At first it was only familiar grief in paper form. Death certificates, funeral receipts, probate notices, letters she remembered receiving and not fully reading because grief had made every envelope too heavy. Near the back, inside a sleeve labeled supplemental notes, she found a page in Arthur's handwriting. Margaret stopped breathing for a second. Bethany noticed. "Is that his?" Yes. The note was short, practical, just like Arthur. It referenced Daniel's Columbus property and a private family advance made years earlier to prevent a financing collapse after Daniel's business troubles. Arthur had written that the advance was not to be treated as a gift unless Margaret agreed in writing after his death. Until then, it was to remain documented as a recoverable family obligation tied to future trust distributions. Margaret read the paragraph 3 times. A recoverable family obligation, not a gift. Not invisible help, not free. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry, not yet. She photographed the note and sent it to Charles. Then she looked at Bethany. "Arthur helped Daniel keep that house." Bethany's face softened with sadness. Did Daniel know it wasn't a gift? Margaret looked back down at the handwriting. That was the question. Charles called again after receiving the photo. This time his voice carried a sharper edge. "This note matters," he said. "It suggests prior assistance to Daniel's property may have been documented with conditions. Does it prove the house is tied to the trust? Not by itself. It proves Arthur intended the advance to remain tracked. I need the corresponding trust ledger or promissory record. If Daniel has been treating that advance as a gift while using additional trust funds to service property debt, the review becomes much more serious." Margaret felt the floor of the story deepen beneath her. So when Daniel says, "I live there for free," he may be ignoring money that helped him live there at all, Charles said carefully. That sentence landed like a quiet explosion. After lunch, Daniel called. Margaret let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then she answered with Bethany sitting beside her. "Mom," Daniel said. His voice sounded strained. "Where are you?" "At Bethany's." A pause. "You shouldn't have pulled her into this. You asked her about my decision-making capacity before I did." He went silent. Margaret did not fill the space. Finally, he said, "Lauren is upset. Lauren wrote that once I'm declared dependent, you can fix everything before the bank deadline." His breathing changed. "Where did you get that?" "You're asking the wrong question. Mom, that email wasn't meant to be seen by me." He did not answer. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. There it was again. Not denial, not horror, only panic that the hidden thing had become visible. "What bank deadline, Daniel?" "It's complicated." "No, it's expensive. That's different." His voice tightened. "You don't understand what we've been carrying." "Then explain it." Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "The house loan reset. The HELOC balloon payment is due. We thought the transfer would let us restructure before things got worse." Margaret looked at Arthur's handwritten note on the table. "And the prior advance your father made?" Daniel's silence changed shape. This one was not confusion. It was recognition. "You found that?" "Yes." He exhaled, shaky and defeated. "Dad said we'd deal with it later. He wrote that it was not a gift unless I agreed." "Mom, did you know?" He did not answer. Margaret's voice softened, though the softness cost her. "Daniel, did you know?" Finally, he whispered, "Yes." The word hurt more than she expected, even after everything. Bethany looked down, giving her the privacy of not witnessing her face too closely. Margaret stared at Arthur's note. "So you let Lauren call me a burden in a house your father helped you keep." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "I was ashamed enough to hide it, not ashamed enough to stop." He had no answer for that. Before she could say more, Bethany's doorbell rang. Bethany stood and looked through the front window. Her face tightened. "It's Lauren," she said. Margaret rose slowly, one hand on the table. Outside, Lauren stood on the porch with Daniel beside her, holding the same folder from the hallway. Margaret's phone was still connected. Daniel's voice came through the speaker, quiet and desperate. "Mom, please don't make this worse." Margaret looked at the door, then at Arthur's note, then at the evidence spread across Bethany's kitchen table. For the first time, she understood that the truth had not only followed her out of Daniel's house, it had arrived at the door. Bethany did not open the door right away. She looked at Margaret first, waiting for permission. That small gesture mattered. In Daniel's house, people had entered rooms, moved keys, opened folders, and handled mail as if Margaret's consent were decorative. Here, even with Daniel and Lauren standing on the porch, Bethany waited. Margaret took one slow breath, let them in. Bethany opened the door only halfway. "This is my home," she said evenly. "If anyone raises their voice, the conversation ends." Lauren's expression tightened, but she stepped inside. Daniel followed behind her, looking less like a man arriving to confront his mother, and more like one being pulled toward consequences he had spent months avoiding. His phone was still connected to Margaret's call. She ended it before he could hear Charles's name again. Then she placed her own phone face up on the table beside Arthur's handwritten note. Lauren's eyes went immediately to the papers spread across Bethany's kitchen table. "You brought documents here?" she asked. Margaret sat down carefully. Her knee was aching from the stress of the day, but she would not stand beneath Lauren's judgment like a child being scolded. "I brought my documents here," she said. Daniel's gaze found the handwritten note. His face changed before he could hide it. Lauren noticed. "What is that?" Margaret touched the edge of the page. A note from Arthur. Daniel looked at the floor. Lauren stepped closer, but Bethany moved slightly between her and the table. "Ask before touching anything," Bethany said. Lauren gave her a cold look. "This is family business." Bethany did not move. "Margaret is my family." The sentence hung there, quiet and solid. Margaret felt unexpected warmth behind her ribs. She had not realized how long it had been since someone took her side without needing evidence first. Lauren turned back to Daniel. "What note?" Daniel's voice came out low. "Dad wrote about the advance." "The what?" Margaret watched Lauren carefully now. The confusion on her face looked real, but Margaret had learned that real confusion did not mean innocence. Sometimes people knew part of a lie and were shocked only by the portion they had not been told. "Arthur helped Daniel keep the Columbus house years ago," Margaret said. "He documented it as a recoverable family obligation unless I later agreed in writing to treat it as a gift." Lauren looked at Daniel. "You told me your father gave you that money." Daniel rubbed a hand over his mouth. "That's what it felt like at the time." "No," Margaret said, "that is what you wanted it to be." His eyes lifted to hers, wounded. But she had no room left to protect him from the truth he had made. Lauren's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "Even if that is true, it was years ago. It has nothing to do with the current transfer." "It has everything to do with how you talk about me in that house," Margaret said. Lauren folded her arms. "Here we go." "No," Margaret said. "You are going to hear this. You said Daniel gives me a roof. You said he feeds me. You said the household carries me. But Arthur's money helped Daniel keep that roof before I ever moved under it." Daniel looked away. Bethany's face tightened with quiet anger. Lauren's voice sharpened. "You are twisting the past to punish us for needing help." Margaret looked at her. "You did not ask for help. You built pressure, hid mail, questioned my judgment, and tried to move trust assets before I understood what was happening." Lauren opened the folder she had brought and pulled out the statement of concern again. "Because you are not behaving rationally." Bethany stepped forward. "Careful." Lauren ignored her. "She is hiding documents in other people's houses, calling lawyers, refusing to speak to her own son without witnesses, and turning routine financial planning into an accusation." Margaret picked up the clinic log from Dr. Reeves's office and placed it beside Arthur's note. "You called my doctor," she said. Lauren's face froze. Daniel looked at her sharply. "You said you only asked generally." "That is what I did," Lauren snapped. Margaret read from the note, her voice steady. Caller identified as Margaret Hale. Asked whether caregiver observations could support request for assisted financial management. Bethany's eyes moved to Daniel. Daniel looked sick. Lauren recovered quickly. Because someone had to be responsible. You were becoming suspicious and erratic. Suspicious because my papers was missing, Margaret said. Erratic because I asked questions. Because you did not understand the stakes. Then explain them. Lauren's mouth closed. Margaret turned to Daniel. You said the HELOC balloon payment is due. How much? Daniel shook his head. Mom, this isn't. How much? He looked at Lauren. She gave him no help this time. Finally, he said the number. Bethany drew in a quiet breath. Margaret did not react visibly, though the amount sent a cold line through her chest. It was large enough to explain panic. Large enough to explain deadlines. Not large enough to excuse betrayal. And the private lending folder? Margaret asked. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Lauren turned on him. What private lending folder? Margaret watched that land. There it was. Another secret inside the secret. Daniel sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I was trying to bridge the payment. With what collateral? Margaret asked. He looked at the table. Bethany said quietly, Daniel. His voice dropped. Expected trust liquidity. Lauren stared at him. You used expected trust money to secure a private loan? Not secure, Daniel said quickly. Not formally. It was part of the plan. Margaret closed her eyes for 1 second. Expected trust liquidity. That was what she had become in his life. Not mother, not widow, not a woman recovering from surgery. Liquidity. She opened her eyes and reached for her phone. What are you doing? Lauren demanded. Call Charles. Daniel stood. Mom, wait. No. He looked desperate now. If you call him with that, it could ruin me. Margaret looked at her son, and for a moment she saw not the little boy he had once been, because she refused to soften the truth with childhood memories, but the grown man he was now. A man who had made promises using money he did not control. A man who had let his wife prepare documents questioning his mother's mind. A man who had known Arthur's help was not simply a gift and had buried that fact under years of silence. You should have thought about that before using my trust as part of your plan, she said. Lauren slapped the folder shut. Your trust, your money, your documents. Do you hear yourself? Daniel is your son. Yes, Margaret said, and I am his mother, not his emergency fund. The words came out quiet. They landed harder because of it. Bethany's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, then frowned. Margaret, she said, Charles is calling me. Margaret turned. Charles? Bethany answered and placed the phone on speaker. Charles's voice filled the kitchen, calm but urgent. Margaret, I tried your line. The bank just released a supplemental ledger. Daniel's face drained. Charles continued. There is a reference to the original property advance Arthur documented. It was not closed out. It was carried as recoverable against Daniel's future trust distributions. Lauren stared at Daniel. You told me that was gone, Daniel whispered. I thought it didn't matter anymore. Charles heard enough to pause. Daniel, if you are present, I strongly advise everyone to stop discussing this informally. Margaret looked at her son. Charles continued. Margaret, there is one more issue. The ledger shows a recent request to reclassify the original property advance as a gift. Margaret's hand went cold around the phone. I never agreed to that, she said. I know, Charles replied. That is why I need you to look at something I just emailed. Bethany opened her laptop and pulled up the message. Margaret leaned close. The attached page showed a reclassification request. Near the bottom was a typed beneficiary acknowledgement, and beneath it in blue ink was a signature, Margaret Elaine Hale. Margaret stared at the screen. The signature looked like hers, but she had never signed it. Margaret did not touch the laptop. For several seconds, the only sound in Bethany's kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator and Lauren's shallow breathing. The signature on the screen sat beneath Margaret's typed name, elegant enough to fool someone who did not know her hand well, wrong enough to make her stomach turn. It looked like hers. It was not hers. Daniel stared at the screen as if he were seeing the document for the first time. Lauren stood beside him, face tight, eyes fixed not on the signature but on Daniel. Who submitted that? Margaret asked. No one answered. Charles's voice came through Bethany's phone. Margaret, do not speculate out loud. I need you to answer one question clearly. Did you sign that acknowledgement? No, she said. I did not. Daniel's face twisted. Mom, wait! Margaret turned to him. Did you know about this? I knew there was a reclassification request, he said quickly. I didn't know there was a signature. Lauren made a small sound. Daniel. He looked at her. What? Don't! That single word told Margaret more than denial could have. Bethany stepped closer to the laptop. Lauren, did you submit this? Lauren's eyes flashed. This is none of your business. It became my business when you came into my house holding papers about my aunt. She is not your aunt by blood, Lauren snapped. The room went cold. Bethany's face hardened, but Margaret lifted one hand. Bethany is family because she acted like it. Lauren looked away first. Charles spoke again, firm now. I'm advising everyone present not to destroy, alter, forward, print, or discard any document connected to this matter. Margaret, I am sending the bank a formal dispute of that acknowledgement immediately. Bethany, if Margaret agrees, please take a photograph of the screen as displayed. I agree, Margaret said. Bethany photographed the laptop screen, then the email header, then the full attachment details. Daniel watched without moving. Lauren's hand tightened around her folder. This is getting insane, Lauren said. No, Margaret said quietly, it is getting documented. Daniel sank into a chair, elbows on knees, both hands pressed over his mouth. For a moment he looked as if every layer of pretending had fallen away. But grief had made Margaret patient, and betrayal had made her careful. She no longer confused distress with honesty. Charles continued, Margaret, I want you at my office tomorrow morning. Bring Arthur's note, the trust packet, the clinic log, the forwarded email, and any recovered records. Daniel and Lauren should not attend unless invited. Lauren laughed sharply. Of course. Separate her from her family first. Margaret looked at her. You tried to separate me from my own records. Daniel lifted his head. Mom, please, I swear I didn't sign your name. She believed that he might be telling the truth about that one thing. Strangely, that did not comfort her. If Daniel had not signed it, then someone else had. And that someone had done it inside a plan Daniel had started. Did you benefit from it? She asked. He swallowed. Mom, did you benefit from making your father's advance disappear as a recoverable obligation? His eyes filled, but he did not answer. That was enough. Lawrence stepped in. This is ridiculous. Arthur helped his son. Families help each other. Only a bitter person turns that into debt years later. Margaret stood slowly, one palm flat on the table. Arthur helped Daniel. You tried to erase the record of that help while calling me dependent. Lauren's face flushed. Because you are dependent right now. No, Margaret said. I am recovering. There is a difference. Bethany moved beside her. I think you should leave. Lauren stared at her. Excuse me? You heard me. This conversation is over. Daniel stood unsteadily. Bethany, please. No, Bethany said. You came here with a folder about Margaret's judgment. Now there's a document with a signature she says she didn't give. You need to leave. For a second, Daniel looked ready to argue. Then he looked at Margaret, and whatever he saw in her face stopped him. Lauren did not move. You're making a mistake, she said to Margaret. You think Charles is going to save you, but legal fights cost money. Family support is not guaranteed. When this blows up, don't come back acting like we pushed you out. Margaret felt the old fear rise, the guest room, her medication on the nightstand, the rest of her clothes, the house key in her purse, the knowledge that even temporary shelter could be used as a weapon. Then she looked down at Arthur's handwriting. Not a gift unless Margaret agrees in writing. Arthur had protected her voice even before she knew she would need it. I will come back for my belongings with a witness, Margaret said. Daniel looked stricken. Mom, you don't have to do that. Yes, she said. I do. Lauren grabbed her folder. Fine. Daniel lingered a moment longer. I didn't want this. Margaret looked at him with a sadness that felt almost older than love. Then why did you keep choosing it? He had no answer. After they left, Bethany locked the door. Margaret remained standing until the sound of their car faded from the street. Only then did her knees weaken. Bethany guided her gently into a chair. Charles was still on speaker. Margaret, I'm here. Are you safe staying with Bethany tonight? Margaret looked at Bethany, who nodded immediately. Yes, good. Do not return to Daniel's house alone. Tomorrow we will review the documents and decide next steps. The disputed signature changes the seriousness of this matter. Could it be fraud? Bethany asked. It could be, but we will not label it until we have enough facts. What matters tonight is preservation. Margaret almost smiled despite herself. Charles sounded exactly like Arthur would have wanted, careful, steady, impossible to rush. After the call ended, Bethany made soup neither of them really wanted. Margaret ate a spoonfuls because she needed to take her medication. The simple act of caring for her body felt defiant now. She was not a burden. She was a woman under pressure who still deserved food, rest, and choices. Later, in Bethany's guest room, Margaret arranged the documents on the bed one final time. She photographed Arthur's note again under better light. She saved Lauren's email under a new file name. She copied the signature page into a separate folder marked Disputed Acknowledgement. Then she wrote in her notebook. June 9, Charles sent reclassification request. Signature appears to be mine but is not mine. Daniel knew of request, claims he did not know about signature. Lauren told Daniel not to speak. Bethany witnessed. I will not return alone. She read the last sentence twice. I will not return alone. That was not fear, it was policy. In the morning, Bethany drove Margaret to Charles Whitaker's office. Margaret carried the documents in the locking pouch on her lap the entire ride. She watched the city pass outside the window, ordinary neighborhoods, gas stations, a man walking a dog, people buying coffee before work. The world was still functioning normally. Her family was not. Charles met them in the conference room with more files than before. His expression told Margaret that the night had not made things better. "I received additional records from the bank early this morning," he said. Margaret sat. "About the signature?" "Partly. The acknowledgement was submitted electronically with a scanned signature page. The bank system shows it came through Daniel's trustee portal." Daniel's portal, not Daniel's hand perhaps, but Daniel's access. Margaret absorbed that slowly. "Can you tell who uploaded it?" "Not yet. We've requested access logs. But there is another issue." He slid a document across the table. It was a ledger page, clean columns, dates, transaction codes, notes. Charles pointed to one entry from years earlier, shortly after Arthur's death. "Here is the original property advance. It was carried as recoverable just as Arthur's note said." Then he moved his finger to another entry. "Here is the attempted reclassification." Margaret looked at the amount tied to Daniel's property. Her breath caught. It was much larger than she had imagined. Charles said gently, "Margaret, based on this ledger, a portion of Daniel's home financing history has been tied to trust records for years." Bethany whispered, so when Lauren said Margaret was living under their roof, Margaret finished the thought herself, voice barely above a whisper. "I had already helped hold up the roof." Charles did not soften the truth. "Yes." Margaret leaned back slowly. The insult returned to her then, not yet spoken in the timeline of what had happened, but waiting ahead like thunder. "You eat here for free." Now she knew what that sentence would mean when it came, not just cruelty. Ignorance built on her sacrifice. Before she could speak, Charles's assistant knocked and entered with a sealed envelope. "This was just delivered from the bank," she said. Charles opened it, scanned the first page, and his expression changed. "Margaret," he said, "the bank has scheduled a formal review meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Daniel has been notified as secondary trustee." Margaret understood before he finished. Daniel and Lauren would have one more chance to explain, and so would she. Margaret sat in Charles Whitaker's conference room, with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she had not tasted. The formal review meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon, but the air already felt like a courtroom without a judge. Charles had spread the documents across the table in careful groups. Bank records in one stack, medical contact logs in another, the disputed signature page in a clear sleeve by itself. Arthur's handwritten note lay closest to Margaret. She kept looking at that note. Not because it solved everything. It did not. It raised almost as many questions as it answered. But Arthur's handwriting reminded her that someone had seen her future as worth protecting before she herself had understood the danger. Bethany sat beside her, quiet and steady. She had taken the morning off work without making Margaret feel guilty about it. Every now and then she glanced toward the door, as if expecting Daniel and Lauren to appear early. Charles took a seat across from Margaret. "Tomorrow's review will not be a trial," he said. "The bank representative will want to confirm facts, identify disputed records, and decide whether Daniel's trustee access should remain frozen while they investigate." "What about the signature?" Margaret asked. "We dispute it formally. They may refer it to their internal fraud department. They may require handwriting review. They may request access logs. That will take time." Margaret nodded. Time had become strange. For Daniel and Lauren, time was a deadline. For her, time was protection. Every extra day before a signature, transfer, or reclassification gave the truth more room to breathe. Charles slid a document toward her. "This is a written statement denying that you signed the reclassification acknowledgement. Read it carefully. If it is accurate, you may sign it." Margaret read every line. Slowly. No one rushed her. No one sighed. No one told her it was routine. When she finished, she signed her name with deliberate care. Her real signature looked different from the one on the disputed page. Not dramatically. Not enough for a casual glance, but enough for her to feel the difference in her own hand. Charles noticed. "We'll include current signature samples and prior verified signatures." Margaret looked at him. "You think someone copied mine from another document?" "I think we should consider that possibility." Bethany's mouth tightened. They had access to her papers. "Yes," Charles said, "and some of those papers went missing." Margaret felt the old anger move beneath her ribs, not explosive. Focused, it no longer frightened her. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Daniel," she let it ring. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Charles looked at her. "You can listen here if you want." Margaret pressed play on speaker. Daniel's voice filled the room, low and strained. Mom, please call me before tomorrow. Lauren is upset, but I need you to understand something. If this review goes badly, it could affect more than the trust. It could affect the house, my job, everything. I know mistakes were made, but you don't have to let Charles turn this into something we can't fix. Please, just talk to me. The message ended. Margaret stared at the phone. Mistakes were made. Not I made mistakes. Not I hid things. Not I let my wife question your mind. Charles said nothing. Bethany whispered, do you want to call him? Margaret thought about it. Really thought about it. She thought about Daniel outside her locked bedroom door. Daniel asking Bethany about doctors. Daniel admitting money had already moved. Daniel saying Lauren was under pressure as if pressure excused cruelty. No, she said at last. Not alone. She saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Charles. By late afternoon, Margaret returned to Bethany's house with the documents still secured. She planned to rest, but rest had become difficult. Her mind kept arranging facts in rows. Daniel's trustee portal. The forged-looking signature, the property advance, the private lending folder. Lauren's email. At 5, Bethany came into the guest room holding her phone. You should see this. Margaret sat up. Bethany handed her the phone. On the screen was a social media post from Lauren. It did not name Margaret, but it did not need to. Some people confuse help with control. After months of caregiving, meals, transportation, and emotional labor, it is heartbreaking when an elderly family member is manipulated by outsiders and turns against the very people who opened their home. Margaret read it once, then again. Dozens of reactions had already appeared. A few comments offered sympathy. One said, "This is why boundaries with aging parents are so important." Another wrote, "Caregivers never get appreciated." Margaret felt heat rise in her face. Bethany took the phone back gently. She's trying to shape the story before tomorrow. She called Charles an outsider, Margaret said. She called herself a caregiver. Margaret turned toward the window. Outside, Bethany's quiet street looked unchanged. A man loaded groceries from his car. A woman walked past with a tote bag over her shoulder. Ordinary dignity everywhere. No one knew that in the upstairs guest room, an old woman was being repackaged online as confused, ungrateful, and manipulated. Her first instinct was to defend herself publicly. Then she saw Lauren's trap. If Margaret responded in anger, Lauren would call it proof. If she stayed silent, Lauren's version would spread. Either choice had a cost. She called Charles. He listened without interrupting as Bethany read the post aloud. "Do not engage online," Charles said. "Screenshot everything. Include comments if they imply facts about you. We may need to show this as part of a pattern to discredit your capacity or isolate you socially." Margaret closed her eyes, so even silence becomes evidence. Careful silence can. After the call, Bethany screenshotted the post, the comments, the timestamp, and Lauren's profile name. Margaret saved them with the rest of her records. Then she opened her notebook. June 10. Lauren posted publicly implying, "I am elderly, manipulated, ungrateful, and turning against caregivers." No names, but context is clear. "Do not respond." Her hand paused over the final period. Then she added another line. "My dignity does not require an audience." That sentence helped. The next morning, Margaret dressed for the bank review in a gray blazer Bethany had steamed for her. She wore her pearl earrings again. Not for decoration, for memory. Arthur had bought them after a year when money had been tight, and Margaret had tried to talk him out of it. He had told her then that dignity was not wasteful. Bethany drove her to Charles's office first. The review would take place by video conference in his conference room, with the bank's trust officer joining remotely. Daniel and Lauren would appear from their own location with any counsel they chose, though Charles doubted they had retained one yet. At 1:30, everyone gathered. Margaret sat beside Charles. Bethany waited outside at Margaret's request, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd the room. The bank officer, Denise Caldwell, appeared on the screen first. Professional, composed, with a file open beside her. Then Daniel joined. He was alone. For half a second, Margaret felt relief. Then Lauren appeared behind him and sat down. Denise began formally. She reviewed the freeze, the disputed transfer, the disputed reclassification acknowledgement, and the temporary suspension of Daniel's administrative authority. Her voice was neutral, but the facts sounded damning when placed in order. Daniel looked worse with every sentence. Lauren interrupted once. "This is being exaggerated. Margaret has been under stress and influenced by Mr. Whitaker." Denise looked at her screen. "Mrs. Hale's mental capacity is not under review in this meeting. Trust activity is." Lauren's face tightened. Margaret felt a quiet shift in the room. For weeks, Lauren had used the idea of confusion like a curtain. Denise had pulled it back with one sentence. Charles presented the clinic log, the household agreement, the missing records note, and Lauren's email. He did not accuse. He laid them down as part of a pattern. Daniel finally spoke. I initiated the transfer because I believed it would protect the family financially. Denise asked, did Margaret Hale know the request had been initiated? Daniel looked at Margaret through the screen. No, he said. The admission was small but real. Lauren's eyes flashed toward him. Denise made a note. Then she lifted another page. We also need to address the disputed beneficiary acknowledgement reclassifying the original property advance as a gift. Daniel, this was uploaded through your trustee portal. Did you upload it? Daniel looked down. The silence stretched. Lauren leaned forward. He handled the portal, but that doesn't mean, Denise interrupted. Daniel, did you upload it? Daniel's face had gone pale. Margaret held her breath. Finally, he said yes. Lauren closed her eyes. Margaret felt Bethany's presence beyond the door like a lifeline. Denise continued. Did Margaret Hale sign the acknowledgement in your presence? Daniel did not answer. Charles leaned slightly forward. Daniel. Daniel looked at his mother then. For one terrible second, Margaret thought he might lie. Instead, his voice broke. No. The room went completely still. Then Denise asked the question that made Margaret's hands turn cold. Then who provided the signature page to you? Daniel did not answer the bank officer right away. On the screen, his face went still in a way that made Margaret's chest tighten. He was not confused. He was choosing. Everyone in the conference room seemed to understand that. Denise Caldwell waited with her pen above her notes. Charles sat motionless beside Margaret. Lauren stared at Daniel from the corner of his video frame, her lips pressed together so hard they had gone pale. Daniel, Denise repeated, who provided the signature page to you? Daniel looked down at something off-screen. Lauren said quickly, we need a moment. Denise's expression remained professional. You may have a moment after the question is answered. Lauren leaned toward the camera. This meeting is becoming accusatory. Charles spoke before Denise could. The bank is asking about a beneficiary acknowledgement submitted through Daniel's portal with a signature Margaret denies giving. It is a necessary question. Daniel closed his eyes. Margaret watched him, not with anger now, but with a grief so steady it no longer shook. She had spent days learning that her son had hidden debts, initiated transfers, allowed her competency to be questioned, and benefited from trust money. Yet some part of her still waited for him to step toward the truth without being dragged. Finally, Daniel spoke. Lauren gave it to me. The words landed cleanly. Lauren turned on him. Daniel. He did not look at her. She gave me the page. She said Mom had signed it after reviewing old estate papers. Margaret felt the room tilt. Bethany, visible through the glass wall outside the conference room, put one hand over her mouth. Denise wrote something down. Charles's voice stayed even. Did you confirm with Margaret? Daniel swallowed. No. Why not? Daniel's face tightened. Because I wanted it to be true. That was the first honest sentence he had spoken all day. Margaret looked away from the screen for a moment. Wanting something to be true had become Daniel's excuse for not asking whether it was false. Wanting the debt solved, wanting the house secure, wanting his father's advance to be a gift, wanting his mother to sign, wanting Lauren's plan to be help instead of manipulation. Denise turned to Lauren. Mrs. Hale, did you provide the signature page? Lauren's eyes narrowed. I provided paperwork Daniel asked me to organize. I did not forge anything. Margaret heard the careful gap in the sentence. Charles did too. Did you see Margaret sign it? He asked. Lauren's face flushed. I'm not answering questions from you. Denise made another note. You are not required to answer, Mr. Whitaker, but this review will reflect that the source of the disputed signature page is contested. Lauren leaned back, furious. Daniel looked smaller now, as if the chair had absorbed half of him. Denise moved on to the trust freeze. She explained that Daniel's administrative authority would remain suspended while the bank reviewed the disputed acknowledgement, the prior property advance, and recent discretionary withdrawals. The pending asset transfer would not proceed. No reclassification of the original advance would be accepted unless Margaret provided direct, verified consent after independent review. The words came in formal language, but Margaret understood the shape of them. The door had closed, not forever, not absolutely, but for now Daniel could not move the money. He could not erase the debt to the trust. He could not quietly turn Arthur's protection into his solution. Lauren understood too. This is going to destroy us, she said. Denise did not respond to the emotion. The bank's responsibility is to administer the trust according to its terms. Lauren laughed bitterly. Easy to say when you're not the one losing a home. Daniel flinched. Margaret looked at him. Are you losing the home? He looked up slowly. Denise said, "That matter is outside the bank's review unless trust assets were pledged, represented, or used in connection with the property." Charles turned slightly toward the screen. "Daniel, expected trust proceeds represented to any lender or private financing source." Daniel's eyes moved to Lauren. That was answer enough, but Charles waited. Daniel whispered informally. Charles's jaw tightened. "To whom?" "A private lender," Daniel said. "Through a broker Lauren knew." Lauren snapped, "Do not put that on me. You introduced me to him. You made the choice." Margaret listened to them, and something inside her shifted again. Their unity had depended on secrecy. Under questions, it cracked immediately. Denise made another note. "The bank may request information regarding any representations made about trust liquidity." Daniel buried his face in one hand. The review ended with formal next steps. The bank would continue the freeze. Charles would receive document requests. Margaret would be contacted directly and through counsel. Daniel was instructed not to submit any further trust documents until the review was complete. When the screen went dark, the conference room remained silent. Charles closed his folder first. "You did well," he said to Margaret. She did not feel like she had done well. She felt hollowed out. Still, she nodded. Bethany entered quietly. "Are you okay?" Margaret looked at the blank screen where Daniel had been. "No, but I'm clear." That afternoon, Margaret did not return to Daniel's house. Charles advised against it. Bethany drove her back to her place, and Margaret rested in the guest room with the curtains half open and Arthur's note beside her on the nightstand. At 5:30, Daniel called. Margaret let it ring once before answering. Bethany sat nearby at Margaret's request. "Mom," Daniel said. His voice sounded wrecked. "Yes, Lauren left." Margaret closed her eyes. "Where?" "I don't know. She took her bag and said she couldn't watch me ruin us." Margaret did not know what to say. Part of her felt pity. Part of her felt anger. Most of her felt tired of consequences arriving only after harm had already been done. Daniel continued, "I'm not asking you to fix anything." The words were new. Margaret waited. "I just needed to say," his voice faltered. "I should have asked you, before the withdrawals, before the transfer, before any of it." "Yes," Margaret said. "I told myself it was temporary, that I'd make it right before you had to know. That is not making it right, Daniel. That is hiding it successfully." He was quiet. Then he said, "I know." For the first time, she believed he might, but belief did not erase what had happened. "What happens to the house?" she asked. "I don't know. The HELOC payment is due in 3 weeks. The private loan was supposed to bridge it. Without the transfer, I don't have enough." Margaret looked at Arthur's note. "And what do you expect from me?" He exhaled shakily. "Nothing." The answer was correct. It also sounded like it hurt him to give it. Margaret softened her voice. "Daniel, I love you, but I will not rescue you from a plan that required me to disappear inside paperwork." His breath caught. "I understand. Do you?" "I'm starting to." Starting was not enough. But it was something. After the call, Margaret sat quietly for a long time. Bethany did not interrupt. Outside, evening settled over the street. The room dimmed. Margaret thought about Arthur, about the trust, about the strange cruelty of needing legal boundaries around family love. The next morning, Charles called with another update. The bank sent access logs, he said. The disputed signature page was uploaded from Daniel's trustee portal, but the file originated from a device registered under Lauren's name. Margaret closed her eyes. There it was, not a court verdict. "Not yet, but a trail," Charles continued. "The bank will likely refer this for internal fraud review. I will not promise outcomes, but Lauren's involvement is now documented beyond Daniel's statement." Margaret opened her notebook and wrote it down. Device registered under Lauren's name. She underlined Lauren once. Then Bethany appeared in the doorway holding her phone. "Margaret," she said, "Lauren posted again." Margaret looked up. Bethany's expression was tense. "She named you this time." Margaret took the phone. Lauren's post filled the screen. "After opening our home to my mother-in-law during her recovery, she has chosen to attack us legally, freeze family funds, and threaten the stability of our household. Some people would rather destroy their own son than admit they need help." Margaret read the last sentence twice. Then her own phone buzzed with a message from Charles. "Do not respond publicly. Send screenshots. We may need to address defamation and harassment as part of the settlement discussion." Margaret looked at Bethany. For the first time since this began, she did not feel cornered by Lauren's words. She felt ready to answer them with facts. Margaret did not answer Lauren's post. She sent screenshots to Charles, saved them with the rest of the file, and closed the phone. For the first time in days, she understood that not every lie deserved her voice. Some lies deserved records, witnesses, and consequences. The settlement meeting happened 4 days later at Charles's office. Daniel came alone. Lauren did not attend. Her name appeared often enough without her being there. The bank's internal review had confirmed that the disputed signature page had been uploaded through Daniel's trustee portal from a device registered to Lauren. They had not decided whether to refer the matter further, but the document was rejected, the reclassification was void, and Daniel's trustee access was formally revoked. The pending transfer was canceled. The earlier withdrawals were not erased. That was not how real life worked. Charles explained that some had technically fallen within Daniel's limited authority, but the purpose and pattern created enough concern to require repayment terms and accounting. Daniel sat through that explanation with his hands clasped, looking at the table more than at his mother. A repayment agreement was drafted. Daniel would repay the residential debt withdrawals over time. The original property advance Arthur had documented would remain recoverable against Daniel's future trust distributions, unless Margaret later chose otherwise in writing. The HELOC problem did not disappear. Daniel had to sell his SUV, cancel the renovation Lauren had been planning, and begin negotiating directly with his lender without using Margaret's trust as a hidden safety net. Lauren's public posts came down after Charles sent a formal letter preserving claims related to harassment and false statements. By then, enough people had seen the screenshots, Bethany's quiet corrections, and the fact that Lauren had stopped posting so suddenly. Her polished story cracked. Some relatives stopped calling her brave. A few called Margaret to apologize for believing the first version too quickly. Margaret accepted the apologies, but she did not soothe anyone's guilt. Daniel's marriage became uncertain in the weeks that followed. He never gave Margaret details, and she did not ask for them. She only knew Lauren had gone to stay with a friend, and Daniel was living in the house surrounded by bills that could no longer be hidden inside other people's paperwork. One afternoon, Daniel came to Charles's office to sign the final repayment documents. Margaret was already there. They sat across from each other in the same conference room where so much of the truth had surfaced. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. This time he did not follow it with an explanation. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. "For what?" He swallowed. "For using your trust. For letting Lauren question your mind. For unlocking your door. For making you feel like you had to earn a place at my table." Her eyes burned, but she did not look away. "And for the sentence," Daniel's face tightened with shame. "You eat here for free," he whispered. Margaret nodded once. "I knew about Dad's advance," he said. "Not all the details, but enough. I told myself it was old history. I told myself the house was mine because I had worked hard for it." "You did work hard," Margaret said. "But you also forgot who helped you stand." He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I know, maybe he did. Maybe he only knew because consequences had finally made the truth expensive." Margaret no longer needed to decide that day. After Daniel signed, Charles slid a second folder toward Margaret. It contained updated estate documents. Daniel's future access was conditional now. No administrative authority, no automatic control. Any future benefit required clean accounting, no contested signatures, and no attempt to challenge Margaret's capacity without medical and legal basis. Margaret read every line before she signed. Her hand did not shake. 3 weeks later, she moved into a small apartment near a lake north of Columbus. It was not grand. It had one bedroom, wide windows, an elevator, and a balcony just large enough for 2 chairs and a pot of basil. The rent came from distributions Charles helped arrange properly through the protected trust. No secrets, no pressure, no one telling her she should be grateful for space she did not control. Bethany helped her unpack. They placed Arthur's photograph on a bookshelf near the balcony door. The pearl earrings went into a small wooden box on the dresser. The locking pouch stayed in Margaret's desk. Not because she expected more war, but because she had learned that peace and preparation could live in the same room. Daniel visited once after she moved in. He brought no papers, no folders, no requests, just a grocery bag with tea, soups, and the brand of crackers she liked after surgery. "I didn't know if you needed anything," he said. Margaret took the bag. "Thank you." He looked past her into the apartment. "It's nice." "It's mine," she said. The words settled between them. Daniel nodded. "I'm glad." She believed that he wanted to be glad. She also saw the grief in him when he realized what his choices had cost. He had not just lost access to money. He had lost the easy trust of his mother walking into his home without guarding her purse, her door, or her signature. "I'd like to keep seeing you," he said, "if you'll allow it." Margaret looked toward the lake. The water was calm that afternoon, silver under a cloudy sky. "We can have lunch once a month," she said, "here or somewhere public. No financial conversations unless Charles is involved. No Lauren unless I invite her. No papers." Daniel nodded quickly. "Okay. And Daniel, yes, forgiveness, if it comes, will not mean going back. He looked down. I understand. She hoped he did. After he left, Margaret stepped onto the balcony and sat in one of the chairs. For the first time in months, no one knew exactly where her mail was unless she chose to tell them. No one sorted her documents. No one moved her cane because it ruined the look of a room. No one could call her confused and use it as a key to her life. Arthur's trust had protected money, yes, but that was never the deepest thing it saved. It gave Margaret time to hear her own voice again. It gave her the power to say no and have that no mean something. It gave her a door that locked from the inside and a life that did not depend on being tolerated. Weeks later, when she thought back to Daniel's sentence, it no longer broke her the same way. Mom, you eat here for free. No, she thought, watching the lake move softly beneath the afternoon light. No one eats for free when they have paid with years of love, sacrifice, silence, and trust. Margaret had not destroyed her family. She had stopped letting the word family be used as a disguise for control. And for the first time in a long time, peace did not feel like something she had to earn by staying quiet. Would you have made the same choice Margaret did, or would you have tried to forgive Daniel sooner? Sometimes keeping distance is not revenge. Sometimes it is the only way dignity survives.